The bell rings before sunrise. Not in a city, not in a peaceful abbey tucked safely behind fields. It rings inside a fortress of the Knights Templar, where cold stone holds the night a little longer, and every sound seems to travel farther than it should. A gate stands open for only a moment. Beyond it are walls built for war, men sworn to prayer, horses breathing in the dark, and a courtyard where silence is not emptiness. It is discipline. Step through, and the world behind you begins to disappear. Slowly, the first light gathers along the edges of the fortress. The towers are still black against the sky. The wind moves over the walls, low and restless, carrying the smell of earth, iron, leather, and old rain trapped in the stones. This is not the Templars of legend, not the blazing red crosses of popular imagination, not the treasure maps, not the conspiracies that arrived centuries later. This is something quieter, and in many ways, stranger. Before we venture further into the shadows, take a moment to subscribe, so you never miss a secret that history has tried to forget. Because to understand a Templar fortress, we have to begin with the day before it becomes dramatic. Before a messenger arrives, before a sword is drawn, before fear has a name. We begin in the hour when men wake because a bell commands them to wake. When prayer comes before breakfast, obedience before comfort, and every stone wall serves two purposes at once: to defend the body and to discipline the soul. A Templar fortress was never just a castle. It was never just a monastery either. It was a place where those two worlds were forced to live together, uneasily, deliberately, and under the watch of God. The gate closes with a weight that feels almost ceremonial. Not a slam. Not the theatrical crash of a story trying too hard to frighten you. Just the deep, practical sound of wood and iron returning to their proper place. A bar is lowered. A latch is set. Somewhere above, a guard shifts his feet along the wall walk, and the morning air moves through the narrow spaces between the stones. Now the fortress has accepted you, and that matters, because a place like this was designed to change how a person moved, how a person waited, even how a person thought. The main gate was not simply an entrance. It was a question. Who are you? Why have you come? What do you carry? Who follows behind you on the road? In an age when distance itself could be dangerous, gates were instruments of suspicion. A traveler approaching a Templar stronghold might see walls first, then towers, then the controlled darkness of the passage inside. Nothing about the route was accidental. Movement was narrowed. Sight lines were managed. Men above could watch without being easily reached. The fortress did not need to speak its warning. Its architecture did that well enough. Inside, the world opens, but only a little. The courtyard lies ahead, still dim before sunrise, its surface uneven beneath the feet. Hooves have pressed patterns into damp earth. Wagon wheels have left shallow scars. Rainwater has gathered in low places, reflecting a strip of paling sky. The smell here is not romantic. It is cold animal breath, wet straw, old smoke, leather, sweat, and the sour mineral scent of stone that has spent the whole night drinking darkness. This is where the common image of the medieval fortress begins to fail. We often imagine castles as symbols first, proud silhouettes on hills, banners moving in the wind, heroic figures posed against the horizon. But from within, a fortress is less like a monument and more like a machine. Its purpose is to regulate. It regulates danger. It regulates food. It regulates sleep. It regulates who may pass from one space into another. A Templar fortress did all of this while carrying an added burden. It belonged to an order that thought in terms of obedience and sacred duty. So the walls were not only military, they were moral. The gate did not merely keep enemies out. It helped define who was inside the discipline and who remained beyond it. Ahead, the courtyard is enclosed by buildings that do not announce themselves all at once. A chapel may be tucked within the walls, not necessarily grand, but central in meaning. Storage rooms hold grain, tools, tack, and supplies. Stables wait in the half-dark. Somewhere there may be a refectory, a place for meals taken under rule rather than appetite. There are working spaces, too, less likely to appear in legends because legends have little patience for laundry, repair, and accounting. Yet without those ordinary labors, the fortress would fail long before any enemy arrived. The walls rise around you, not as a single blank barrier, but as a series of decisions. Towers project outward so defenders can see along the face of the wall. Walkways allow guards to move above the courtyard and look out across the surrounding land. Arrow slits or narrow openings make the outside visible in fragments. A road here, a slope there. The suggestion of a valley, a line of trees, perhaps a coast or plain depending on the place. A fortress was a way of reading the landscape. From the ground, the outside world might feel vast and uncertain. From the tower, it could be divided into routes, distances, approaches, risks. A rider on the road, a dust cloud, a small group of merchants, a flock moving where it should not. In such places, survival often depended on noticing the ordinary thing that had become slightly wrong. The Templars were not placed in strongholds simply to look impressive. Their houses and fortifications, especially in frontier zones, could guard routes, shelter travelers, store supplies, and serve as points of administration and communication. But it is easy to make that sound cleaner than it was. Protection in the medieval world was rarely abstract. It meant tired people arriving at gates. It meant animals needing water. It meant arguments over space, authority, tolls, food, and fear. It meant that a fortress could be refuge to one person and a threat to another. That contradiction sits quietly in the stones. Walk farther into the courtyard, and the sense of enclosure becomes stronger. The gate behind you is no longer just behind you. It is a fact. The road has been cut off. The open world has narrowed into this inner space, where every surface seems to remind you that freedom here was conditional. The towers are not decorative. The walls are not scenery. The men who live here do not drift through their day according to preference. Someone is watching the horizon. Someone is checking the gate. Someone is assigned to a task that must be done whether the weather is kind or not. And somewhere within these walls, the bell waits to speak again. There is a strange calm in this kind of order, but it is not comfort. It is the calm of a place prepared for interruption. That may be the most important thing to feel as you stand just inside the gate. A Templar fortress was built around the expectation that the peaceful hour might not remain peaceful. The courtyard could hold prayer in the morning, horses by midday, travelers at dusk, and alarm in the night. Its genius was not that it separated war from daily life. It made daily life possible in the presence of war. So we move slowly, past the entry passage, past the thickened walls, past the watchful towers, still dark at their upper edges. The fortress has not yet fully awakened, but already it has told us what it is. A world within a wall. A road interrupted, a house of prayer with a military spine, and behind us, the gate remains closed. They were warriors, yes, but that is the easy part to understand. A man with a sword is not difficult for the imagination. A man with armor, a horse, a shield, a command to guard a road or hold a wall, history gives us many places to put him. We know what to do with that image. We can make him brave, brutal, frightened, proud, tired, foolish, loyal. The medieval world had no shortage of armed men. What makes the Templar more difficult is not the sword. It is the vow. Inside these walls lived men who had entered a religious order. Men expected to submit themselves to discipline not as a temporary arrangement, but as a way of life. They were not simply hired fighters waiting for pay, or local lords defending inherited land. At least in principle, they belonged to something more severe. Their obedience was not meant to be casual. Their poverty was not meant to be decorative. Their chastity was not a poetic flourish added by later storytellers. These vows placed them in the moral universe of monks, even while their work kept them close to violence. That contradiction is what gives the fortress its atmosphere. It explains why a place built for defense could still feel inward-facing, why a chapel might matter more deeply than the largest tower, why the rhythm of the day was not arranged around personal convenience, but around rule, duty, prayer, and readiness. A Templar stronghold was not merely a barracks with religious symbols painted over it. It was an attempt, uncomfortable, disciplined, and deeply medieval, to make war answer to a sacred structure. Whether that attempt always succeeded is another question. Human beings do not become simple because they wear a mantle. A vow does not remove anger, fear, ambition, boredom, hunger, vanity, or the desire to sleep a little longer in the morning. It gives those things a cage. Sometimes the cage holds, sometimes it rattles. And in the case of the Templars, the legend has often been more interested in the cage than in the men inside it. Imagine one of them crossing the courtyard in the dimness before dawn. The white mantle, if he is a knight brother entitled to wear it, would not glow like it does in modern paintings. Cloth gets stained, edges fray. Weather has opinions. The red cross may catch the eye, but the man beneath it is probably cold. He has slept, perhaps not enough. He has risen because the community rises. His private wishes are not the point. His body belongs to the routine of the house. That is a difficult idea for a modern viewer, because we tend to treat identity as something personal, expressive, chosen, and displayed. For the Templar, identity was partly the opposite. It was submission to a role. The clothing, the meals, the prayers, the restrictions, the hierarchy, all of it pressed the individual into the shape of the order. And the fortress helped to do the pressing. Its spaces taught behavior. The chapel gathered the men toward devotion. The refectory turned eating into obedience. The dormitory, if the particular layout included one in the expected communal form, made even sleep less private than we might imagine. The courtyard exposed everyone to everyone else. The gate reminded them that the outside world was near, but controlled. The walls did not simply defend them from danger. They enclosed a pattern of living. This is why the comparison to a monastery is useful, but incomplete. A monastery usually withdrew from the noise of armed life, at least in ideal terms. A military camp prepared for movement, pressure, and command. A Templar fortress borrowed from both worlds without becoming either one entirely. Its men prayed like monks, but they also inspected horses. They lived under religious discipline, but they needed armor within reach. They listened for bells, but also for hoofbeats on the road. There is no need to exaggerate this into melodrama. The reality is already strange enough. A brother might pass from prayer to practical labor without feeling that he had changed worlds. He might hear sacred words in the chapel and later check the condition of a saddle, a girth, a spear shaft, a gate hinge. To us, those tasks belong to separate categories. Spiritual life over here, military logistics over there. But the medieval mind was often less tidy. If the order's mission was understood as sacred service, then even preparation could carry religious weight. That does not mean every man experienced it with perfect devotion. Some probably did. Others may have endured the routine more than loved it. Some may have found meaning in the severity of the life. Others may have felt trapped by it. The sources rarely let us hear the ordinary interior life of a tired brother in a cold fortress before sunrise. We must be careful here. The silence in the record is not permission to invent a diary for him, but we can read the structure around him. A life governed by bells, a hierarchy of command, a community where eating, sleeping, praying, guarding, and fighting were all placed under rule. A place where personal comfort was treated as secondary, sometimes suspiciously secondary, because softness could be imagined as a weakness not only of the body, but of the soul. That is one of the details often missed in popular versions of the Templars. The drama is usually placed in battle, treasure, secrecy, or downfall. Those stories have their place, though some have grown wildly beyond the evidence. But the deeper peculiarity of the order lies in the daily arrangement, the deliberate fusion of renunciation and violence. A man was expected to be humble, obedient, restrained, and also ready to kill or die if the order's mission demanded it. There is tension there that cannot be solved by a clever phrase. It had to be lived. And inside the fortress, it was lived in small repetitions. A lowered gaze, a shared meal, a command obeyed without argument, a sword cleaned not with swagger, but because rust is real and negligence is dangerous, a horse fed before the man thinks too much about his own hunger, a prayer spoken when the body wants only sleep. Perhaps this is why the fortress feels so different from the castle of a noble household. In a lord's castle, power often radiated from family, inheritance, land, marriage, and display. In a Templar fortress, at least in its ideal form, power was meant to be impersonal. The individual brother was not supposed to be the center of the story. The order was. That too is difficult for legend, because legend likes faces. It likes heroes and villains. It likes secret masters, hidden chambers, coded symbols, last stands, forbidden knowledge. It is less patient with men moving through repeated obligations, year after year, under a rule that made even ordinary life feel inspected. But history often hides its meaning in repetition. The fortress at dawn does not need a battle to reveal itself. It reveals itself in the way a man waits for permission to speak, in the way a meal is taken without indulgence, in the way the chapel is placed not as decoration, but as the heart of the day, in the way the same person can be both a monk in discipline and a soldier in function, without belonging comfortably to either image. So when we look around these walls, we should resist the temptation to divide them too neatly. This is not the holy side over here and the violent side over there. The whole place is the contradiction. The bell and the blade, the prayer and the patrol, the vow and the gate, the silence of devotion, surrounded by architecture designed for fear. The men inside did not live beside that contradiction. They lived inside it. Before the sun rises, the fortress is not asleep. It is only waiting in the dark. There are different kinds of darkness in a place like this. The darkness under the gate passage, thick and cold. The darkness inside storage rooms, where grain sacks and barrels sit without ceremony. The softer darkness of a chapel before the first flame is coaxed awake. And then the darkness of the courtyard itself, open to the sky where the walls seem taller because the horizon has not yet returned. A footstep crosses stone, then another, not hurried, not relaxed. The sound belongs to someone who knows where he is going and has made the same walk many times before. Perhaps a guard coming down from the wall. Perhaps another taking his place. Perhaps a brother moving toward prayer with his cloak pulled close against the hour. The fortress begins not with conversation, but with obedience. In a modern household, morning often begins as a negotiation. A few more minutes, a hand reaching for warmth, a private delay. In this world, the bell has already won the argument. Sacred time does not ask whether the body is ready. That may be one of the hardest parts of this life to imagine, honestly. We can picture danger more easily than discipline. Danger is dramatic. Discipline is repetitive. Danger gives a story a shape. Discipline wears down the edges of the person living under it. Slowly, almost invisibly, until the rule becomes the frame through which the day is understood. The men inside these walls did not wake into a day that belonged to them. They woke into a day already divided. Prayer, watch, labor, food, more labor, more prayer. Rest, if rest was granted by the pattern of duty. The bell did not merely announce an event. It rearranged the body. It told men when to rise, when to gather, when to stop being one person alone in the dark and become part of a community moving by command. And there is something slightly unnerving in that. Not because it is cruel in the obvious sense. There are worse things in medieval life than being called to prayer before dawn. But because it reveals a world in which the self was not treated as sacred in the way modern life often treats it. The individual mood, the private preference, the little rebellion of staying in bed, these had very little authority here. The rule had authority. The house had authority. God had authority. Outside, the air remains sharp. The guards on the walls do not have the luxury of forgetting where they are. In the early hour, the landscape beyond the fortress is more imagined than seen. A road is only a paler strip in the dark. Trees may be no more than a blackness with a different edge. The ground below the walls holds whatever the night has hidden. Harmless travelers, stray animals, nothing at all, or trouble not yet close enough to name. A watch change at this hour is practical, but it is also symbolic in a way no one needs to say aloud. The fortress survives because someone remains awake. While others pray, someone listens. While others sleep, someone looks outward. While the chapel gathers bodies toward the invisible, the tower keeps its attention on the visible world. The road, the slope, the approach, the faintest movement where movement should not be. This is not a contradiction the Templars would necessarily have found troubling. To them, vigilance could belong to the same moral universe as devotion. Watching the horizon and keeping the hours of prayer were different forms of duty. One guarded the walls, the other guarded the soul. Neither could be neglected without consequence. Still, inside the body of a tired man, duty is not an idea. It is cold fingers, stiff knees, a throat dry from night air. The ache of having slept lightly, because fortress sleep is never quite innocent. Even when no alarm has sounded, stone keeps its own pressure on the mind. Gates can be tested. Horses can panic. Men can arrive after dark with news that refuses to wait until morning. So the brothers rise. not all at once in a grand cinematic movement, but in fragments. A shape in the dimness, a cloak drawn over the shoulders, a quiet adjustment of clothing. The small domestic sounds of men trying not to disturb more than necessary, though privacy here is thin and silence is a shared discipline rather than a personal mood. This is another place where we must be careful not to decorate the past too heavily. We do not need to imagine every face noble, every gesture solemn, every thought filled with holy purpose. Some men may have woken with devotion, some with irritation, some perhaps with the blank practical obedience of people who have done the same thing so often that feeling no longer announces itself. Routine can become its own weather. The important point is not that every Templar brother was inwardly serene. The important point is that the institution did not depend on serenity. It depended on form. The bell rang whether the heart was ready or not. The feet moved whether the mind was clear or not. The prayer was said not because each morning felt spiritually luminous, but because the day had been ordered around it. And in that ordering, the fortress becomes something more than stone. It becomes a clock with walls, a body with many hands, a system for turning darkness into duty. Somewhere, a door opens into colder air. Somewhere else, a servant or laborer begins the less celebrated work that makes the holy rhythm possible. Fires must be tended, water must be drawn, animals must be checked. The stable does not care that men have vows. Horses are magnificently uninterested in theology. They need feed, grooming, attention, space. If neglected, they will let everyone know in the blunt language of hooves, teeth, and illness. This is where the sacred and the practical meet before dawn, not in a grand statement, but in chores. A fortress can pray only if someone has kept it functioning. The chapel may be the spiritual heart of the house, but the heart needs blood. Grain, water, fodder, oil, wood, leather, metal, labor. These are not background details. They are the hidden grammar of survival. A Templar fortress was not sustained by ideals alone. It was sustained by hands, many of them belonging to people whose names did not travel far into history. That quiet fact matters, because the bell that calls the brothers to prayer also marks the beginning of work for people who may not share the same status, the same vows, or the same memory in legend. The famous white mantle draws the eye. But before sunrise, the fortress is full of other lives moving at the edge of the story. Men who mend, carry, clean, cook, groom, lift, sweep, fetch, and wait. Their labor makes the discipline visible. The sky begins to loosen. Not brighten, exactly. Not yet. It simply becomes less absolute. The highest edges of the walls separate from the night. The towers regain their shapes. A guard's outline sharpens against the paling air. The courtyard, which a moment ago seemed almost without depth, now reveals buckets, stones, doorways, the dark mouth of the stable, the worn path between one building and another. Morning does not arrive suddenly here. It is assembled. A bell, a footstep, a lifted bar, a whispered instruction, a cloak fastened, a flame protected from the wind, a brother crossing toward the chapel, a horse shifting in straw, a man on the wall turning his face toward the road. Piece by piece, the fortress remembers itself, and yet, even as the day begins, there is no sense of release. The dawn does not soften the rule. It reveals it. In daylight, the obligations become easier to see. The walls to patrol, the supplies to guard, the horses to maintain, the prayers to keep, the hierarchy to obey. the road to watch. For us, sunrise often suggests possibility. Here, it suggests assignment. That is not a small difference. It changes the emotional weather of the place. The coming light does not invite the men to ask what they want from the day. It shows them what the day requires. And perhaps that is why the early hour feels so revealing. Before banners, before armor, before any public performance of strength, the fortress shows its true nature in the simple act of waking. It is not chaos becoming life. It is order resuming control. The bell fades, but its authority remains in the movement it has created. Men pass through dim spaces toward prayer. Guards keep their faces to the outer dark. The servants of the house begin the practical labor that history too often leaves unnamed. Above them all, the walls hold the cold, and beyond the walls the land waits, uncertain and still. The day has begun, not because the sun has risen, because the rule has. The chapel is smaller than the walls would lead you to expect. That is often how the center of a place reveals itself. Not by size, but by gravity. You enter from the cold edge of morning into a room where the air has changed. The fortress outside is built to resist force. Thick walls, guarded passages, towers that break the horizon into angles. But here, the architecture gathers inward. The lines are simpler. The sound is closer. A few flames tremble in the half-light, and the stone does not feel defensive so much as watchful. No one has come here to be entertained. That may be the first thing to understand. The chapel is not a theater of devotion, not in the modern sense. It is not designed to impress a restless audience with spectacle. Its purpose is older, stricter, more difficult to fake. It takes men who have woken in darkness, men whose lives are tied to horses, weapons, roads, and walls, and places them before something that claims authority over all of it. Before the sword, prayer. Before the patrol, prayer. Before the gate opens fully to the day, prayer. This ordering matters. It tells us how the fortress understood itself. The military function may be the most visible from outside, but from within, the chapel gives the day its first meaning. The tower says, "Watch the road." The armoury says, "Be ready." The stable says, "Movement is possible." The chapel says, "Remember why readiness is being demanded of you." Whether every man felt that meaning deeply is something we cannot know. The evidence does not allow us to lean close enough to hear each private thought. We should not pretend that every brother who bowed his head did so with equal fervor. Religious communities, like all communities, contain tired men, distracted men, proud men, frightened men, men carried along by habit, men held up by belief. The rule can shape the body even when the heart wanders, but the shape still matters. A brother enters, then another. Cloth shifts. A boot touches stone. Someone coughs once and then suppresses the sound as if even the body must be reminded of its place. The white mantles, where they appear, do not turn the room into a painting. In this dimness, they are patches of pale fabric among human forms, worn by men whose identities have been narrowed by vow and office. The Red Cross, so vivid in later imagination, would not need to blaze here. It is enough that it is present. Symbols inside a chapel do not behave the way they do on a battlefield banner. In battle, a cross can gather men outward toward movement, danger, group courage, and the brutal simplicity of friend and enemy. In a chapel, the same sign turns inward. It asks what kind of obedience is being offered. It asks whether violence, when wrapped in sacred language, becomes purified or merely more troubling. That question has never fully left the Templars. It is part of why they remain so fascinating. Not because every rumor about them deserves belief. Many do not. But because their very existence unsettles neat categories. We prefer monks to be peaceful and soldiers to be worldly. The Templars force those categories into the same room before dawn, beneath a stone arch, while a candle gutters in the cold air. And the room does not explain the contradiction away. It contains it. Low voices begin, measured and restrained. The words belong to a liturgical world, not a private conversation. No one is improvising a personal spirituality for the benefit of the morning. The prayer has a form older than the man speaking it, and that is precisely the point. The individual brother enters a pattern. His voice joins something already there. This kind of worship can feel distant to modern ears, especially if we are used to sincerity announcing itself emotionally. But medieval religious life often trusted repetition in a way our age finds difficult. To repeat was not necessarily to be empty. Repetition could be discipline. Repetition could be memory. Repetition could be a way of hammering the soul into a shape it would not choose on its own. The chapel is where that hammer falls most gently, and perhaps most deeply. Outside, the fortress is beginning to stir. A horse shifts in the stable. A guard's step passes somewhere above. The wind noses at a crack near the door, but the room holds its own center. It makes the rest of the stronghold seem briefly suspended, as if the walls, weapons, and stores are waiting for permission to matter. That is not sentimental language. It is a structural truth. In a Templar fortress, prayer was not an ornament added to a military institution to make it respectable. It was one of the main engines of identity. Without it, the place becomes only a fortified post held by armed men. With it, the fortress becomes something more peculiar. A disciplined religious house whose members must also remain ready for violence. That does not make the violence simple. It may make it more complicated. The chapel forces us to slow down before we turn the Templars into either heroes or hypocrites. Both labels can be lazy when used too quickly. Some men may have lived with severe sincerity. Some may have failed their vows in ordinary human ways. Some may have believed, without hesitation, that their service formed part of a sacred duty. Others may have discovered, in private hours no record preserves, that the soul is not easily aligned with the hand that holds a weapon. What we can say with more confidence is that the chapel stood at the center of the rhythm. Not always the physical center of every fortress layout. Stone plans varied. Sites differed. Practical needs altered arrangements. But in meaning, the chapel drew the day toward itself. It made time sacred before labor scattered the community into tasks. It reminded the brothers that they were not supposed to be merely efficient. They were supposed to be obedient. And obedience in this world was not a soft virtue. It could be harder than courage. Courage may flare for a moment. Obedience must survive the dull hour, the cold morning, the repeated command, the meal without indulgence, the long watch when nothing happens. It must survive the pride of trained men who know they can ride, fight, endure, command. The chapel takes that pride and asks it to kneel. There is the quiet power of the room. Not mystery in the cheap sense. No secret ritual is required. No hidden door. No coded chant beneath the floor. The strangeness is already visible. Armed religious men lowering themselves into a discipline that claims to master not only what they do, but what they are allowed to desire. For a few moments, the fortress is still, or seems to be. The flames move. Breath rises faintly in the cold. The voices continue, low and bound together by rule. The men do not belong entirely to themselves. They belong to the order, to the hour, to the God they have promised to serve, and to the dangerous world waiting just beyond the walls. When the prayer ends, nothing dramatic has happened. No revelation splits the morning. No secret is uncovered. The stones do not tremble. And yet the entire day has been set in motion. Because after the chapel, the fortress can become practical again. Men can eat, horses can be groomed, weapons can be checked, gates can be opened with caution, orders can be given. But all of it now proceeds under the memory of this room, where the first labor of the day was not defense, but submission. As you step back toward the courtyard, the air outside feels wider, rougher, less forgiving. The pale light has strengthened. The walls show their height. The tower resumes its authority over the horizon. Somewhere, work has already begun. But behind you, in the small chapel, the candles are still burning. And in a fortress built to watch the world, this is the chamber that watches the men inside. The first meal of the day does not arrive as a reward. It arrives as a necessity. After the chapel, after the low voices and the bowed heads, the brothers move toward food with the same restraint that governs almost everything else within the walls. The body has been awake long enough now to make its demands known. Cold sharpens hunger. Prayer does not fill the stomach. A man may discipline his appetite, but he cannot politely explain to his muscles that devotion should be enough. Still, even hunger has rules here. The eating space is not a hall of celebration. It is not the long, roaring feast of popular medieval imagination, crowded with laughter, dogs, spilled wine, and some enormous roast placed at the center, as if history were always waiting for a banquet scene. That world existed in certain noble households at certain moments. But this is not that kind of house. Here, food is part of obedience. The room is plain in spirit, even if its exact arrangement would depend on the particular fortress and period. Benches, tables, stone underfoot, the lingering cool of morning, men entering not as guests invited to pleasure, but as members of a disciplined community returning to the practical business of keeping the body useful. And usefulness is the key. A Templar brother and does not eat because the day promises comfort. He eats because there are gates to guard, horses to manage, roads to watch, supplies to move, commands to obey, prayers to return to, and perhaps, though no one needs to say it aloud every morning, violence to endure. The meal is therefore humble, but not meaningless. Bread may be present. Some form of drink may be present. There may be simple fare suited to the region, season, and resources of the house. But exact menus are difficult to state with confidence without anchoring ourselves to a specific time, location, and surviving rule or account. So we should be honest. The precise contents of this morning meal need verification before they are described too confidently. The important truth is not whether the bowl contains this ingredient rather than that one. The important truth is the attitude surrounding it. Restraint, order, no indulgent display, no private feast of the self. The brothers eat as men under discipline. In many religious communities, meals could be shaped by silence, readings, hierarchy, and careful conduct. The Templar world belongs to that broader discipline of religious life, even as its work remains military. So the meal does not break the atmosphere created in the chapel. It extends it into the stomach. That is a detail worth pausing over. Because in this fortress, the sacred does not remain safely inside the chapel. It follows the men to the table. It stands behind the way they sit, the way they receive food, the way they do not reach too eagerly, the way speech is limited or absent depending on the rule being observed. A meal becomes another test of the will, not a dramatic one, but perhaps a more revealing one. Anyone can look solemn in candlelight for a few minutes. It is harder to be disciplined while hungry. The room has its own sound, not silence in the perfect, impossible sense, but a controlled quiet made of small, necessary noises. Wood shifting under weight, a cup set down, bread torn rather than admired, a bench creaking, a swallow, the scrape of a bowl, perhaps the voice of a reader, if the practice is being observed here, carrying words across the room while the men eat without conversation. It is easy to underestimate how powerful such quiet can be. Speech is one of the ways human beings claim space. We joke, complain, negotiate, charm, interrupt, and defend ourselves with words. Remove casual speech from a meal, and eating changes. The mind has fewer places to hide. The body becomes more noticeable. So does the presence of others. A man hears not only his own hunger, but the shared discipline of the room around him. This is where the Templar fortress feels least like a castle and most like a religious house. Yet the military world has not disappeared. It is sitting at the table, in worn hands, stiff shoulders, and the knowledge of tasks waiting outside. A knight brother may have the status and training associated with mounted warfare, but in this moment he is simply another man eating under rule. His sword, if nearby or stored according to the customs of the house, cannot chew for him. His courage cannot excuse bad conduct. His rank does not turn the meal into luxury. There is a quiet leveling in that, not equality in the modern sense. Medieval religious and military life had hierarchies, and the Templar order certainly made distinctions between knights, sergeants, chaplains, servants, and others attached to the house. But under the rule of the meal, even hierarchy is made to behave itself. Rank may determine place, portion, duty, or authority. It does not abolish restraint. The body is fed, but the self is not allowed to expand. That may be one of the hidden purposes of such a meal. It keeps the appetite from becoming a little kingdom. In a fortress, appetite can be dangerous. Not only the appetite for food, but for comfort, praise, possession, command, ease. The day ahead will require endurance, and endurance begins with learning not to obey every desire just because it speaks loudly. Of course, we should not imagine this too cleanly. Someone may be tired. Someone may be annoyed by the food. Someone may be thinking about a horse with a swollen leg, a damaged strap, a rumor from the road, an unpleasant duty assigned for later. Someone may be trying to stay awake. A young brother may still be learning how to make his body fit the expected composure. An older man may no longer think about the rules because the rules have become the rails on which his life moves. The past becomes more believable when we allow it to contain boredom. Boredom is not the enemy of history. It is often where history lived. A quiet meal, repeated day after day, tells us more about the Templars than another exaggerated legend about hidden treasure ever could. Treasure stories make them exotic. Meals make them human. Men who could become symbols still had to swallow, digest, wake too early, and return to work. A red cross on a mantle did not make the bread softer. A vow did not make the morning warmer. And perhaps that is why this plain room matters. It resists spectacle. The Templar myth tends to pull the order upward into drama. Secret rites, lost relics, coded mysteries, accusations, downfall. But daily discipline pulls them back down to the bench, the cup, the shared table, the rule that says even eating must be folded into service. The truth of the order is not found only in its famous crisis. It is found in these repeated acts of control, so ordinary that chroniclers often had little reason to describe them in detail. A meal ends as quietly as it began. No one applauds endurance. No one announces that the body has been successfully restored for another day inside the walls. Men rise. Benches shift. Vessels are cleared. Whatever food remains is managed according to the customs and needs of the house. The room begins to empty, and the discipline that held the men at the table loosens only enough to send them into other forms of discipline. Outside, the courtyard is brighter now. The fortress has moved beyond the fragile hour before sunrise. Labor is waiting in plain sight. A gate must be checked. A horse must be led out. A guard must take his position. Someone must handle water, grain, leather, iron, wood. The day is no longer being summoned into being. It has arrived, and with it comes the long, unromantic work of survival. The brothers step back into the morning not satisfied exactly, and not deprived in some theatrical way. Fed, measured, available. That is what the meal has made them. Not comfortable men, useful men. By the time the meal is finished, the fortress has stopped whispering. It has begun to work. The change is not dramatic enough for a trumpet, and that is precisely why it matters. The morning opens through labor. A door swings wide. A man crosses the courtyard with a bucket in each hand. Somewhere, iron touches iron with a dull, practical note. The stables answer with a shift of hooves. Voices appear now, low and purposeful, no longer the sacred murmur of the chapel or the controlled quiet of the table, but the working speech of a place that must keep itself alive. The courtyard becomes the center of everything. Not because it is beautiful, though in the first full light it may have a severe kind of beauty. The upper stones catch the sun before the ground does. The towers lose their black outline and become surfaces, chipped, weathered, patched, strengthened, repaired. Damp places shine briefly where the morning has not yet reached them. The air carries several worlds at once. Smoke from a fire, animal warmth from the stables, leather oil, wet straw, wool, dust, and the faint sourness that gathers anywhere many bodies live too closely inside walls. This is the fortress most legends forget. The famous knight, the white mantle, the red cross. These draw the eye so strongly that they can make the rest of the place disappear. But a fortress cannot be maintained by symbols. It cannot patrol a road with symbols. It cannot feed a horse, mend a harness, sharpen an edge, patch a roof, store grain, clean a yard, or keep a gate hinge from failing at the worst possible hour. For that, it needs people. Many of them. And not all of them are knights. A sergeant may be moving through the yard, armed or tasked according to his role, less celebrated than the knight brother, but still woven into the military life of the order. A groom works near the horses, where status means very little if an animal is nervous, ill-tempered, or simply too large to care about human pride. A servant carries supplies from one building to another. A cook or kitchen worker tends to the stubborn arithmetic of feeding men who are supposed to be restrained. Yes, but still very much alive. A craftsman examines a strap, a buckle, a piece of metalwork the small failure that could become a large problem if ignored. The courtyard gathers them all, and in that gathering, the fortress becomes less like a backdrop and more like an organism. It breathes through the gate. It sees through the towers. It feeds through the stores. It moves through the stables. It remembers its purpose in the chapel. It hardens itself in the armoury. But the courtyard is where the pulse can be felt most clearly, because here the separate systems touch one another. A horse is led out, and someone else must move aside with a basket. A guard crosses toward the gate while a laborer carries wood. A brother gives an instruction that interrupts one task and begins another. News from the wall descends into the yard, perhaps nothing more than a traveler seen on the road or a change in the weather over the hills. Even small information matters in a closed place. It travels from person to person until the fortress adjusts. This is a useful correction to the romantic picture of medieval military life. We often imagine readiness as a posture, a man standing with a sword, eyes fixed on the horizon. But real readiness is maintenance. It is repetition. It is the unglamorous prevention of collapse. A fortress that waits until danger arrives to organize itself is already late. So the day fills with ordinary vigilance. A gate is inspected not because anyone expects it to fail that morning, but because failure prefers neglect. Tack is repaired not because a patrol is heroic, but because leather breaks. Grain is checked because hunger is an enemy that does not need a banner. Water is drawn because thirst has no respect for vows. A courtyard swept clear of refuse is not a poetic detail, but a practical defense against sickness, disorder, and vermin. There is intelligence in this routine, not the intelligence of secret codes or hidden maps, but the harder intelligence of people who understand that survival depends on systems. The Templars have often been wrapped in mysteries so elaborate that the most impressive thing about them is sometimes overlooked. They built and managed institutions, houses, lands, supplies, personnel, animals, money, obligations, schedules, discipline. The fortress courtyard is where that institutional reality comes visible in human motion, and it would not have felt equally grand to everyone inside it. For a knight brother, the courtyard might be part of a religious military vocation, a space where obedience moves toward duty. For a servant, it may simply be the place where another load must be carried before the sun grows high. For a groom, it is where a horse's mood can ruin the morning. For a guard, it is where boredom and alertness must somehow occupy the same body. For someone newly arrived, perhaps a traveler or messenger, it may feel like entering a world that has no interest in explaining itself. The fortress does not pause to be understood. It continues. A man calls softly near the stable. A latch resists, then gives. Someone laughs once, not loudly, and perhaps not for long, because even disciplined places are still inhabited by human beings, and human beings leak out around the edges of every rule. That small laugh is worth allowing. Without it, the past becomes too polished, too solemn, too obedient to our expectations. Medieval people did not spend every hour posing for illuminated manuscripts. They got annoyed. They made mistakes. They knew which door stuck in damp weather. They remembered who snored, who worked well, who avoided work, who handled horses with patience, and who should not be trusted with a delicate repair unless no other living soul was available. The daily life of the fortress was made of such knowledge. Much of it was never written down because everyone nearby already knew it. That is one of the frustrations of history. The most lived-in details are often the least recorded. Rules may survive, Charters may survive. Accounts may survive. Accusations may survive. But the exact texture of a morning, the complaint under someone's breath, the careful hand on a nervous horse, the cook judging whether there is enough food for unexpected arrivals, these vanish almost completely. So we approach them carefully, not as invented facts, but as reasonable human realities around the documented structures of the life. Discipline, hierarchy, prayer, labor, defense, supply. The courtyard lets us hold those things together without pretending we know every name or every face. By now, the sun has reached deeper into the yard. It shows the imperfections, chips in the stone, repairs that do not quite match the older work, mud at the edges of the path, a worn threshold where countless feet have passed. These details have their own honesty. They tell us the fortress is not a symbol frozen in time. It is being used. Used things bear marks. Useful things are rarely pristine. That too is part of the secret history. Not a hidden chamber, a worn threshold, not a whispered conspiracy, a man carrying water because the day will not wait. As the courtyard comes alive, the Templar fortress becomes more complicated than its legend. It is no longer only a place of sacred warriors. It is a workplace, a shelter, a checkpoint, a storehouse, a stable, a chapel, a command post, a community under pressure. The white mantle remains important, but it is no longer alone in the frame. Around it are hands without fame, hands that lift, mend, feed, clean, open, close, sharpen, count, and carry. The morning depends on them, and so does the myth, though the myth rarely admits it. For a while there is no single story to follow, only motion. A brother crossing into light, a groom disappearing into the stable, a guard mounting the steps toward the wall, a worker bending over a repair that no song will ever mention. The fortress holds them all inside its walls, not gently, but completely. And from above, the courtyard must look almost orderly. From within, it is something better than orderly. It is alive. The stables are warmer than the chapel. Not kinder, exactly. Warmth in a medieval stable comes with its own demands. It is animal heat, close air, damp straw, leather, manure, wool, breath, and the steady knowledge that anything large enough to carry a fighting man is also large enough to injure one by accident and look vaguely offended afterward. The fortress may be ruled by bells, but the horses answer to older laws. Hunger, fear, habit, muscle, trust. Step inside and the morning changes texture. The light is lower here, filtered through openings and doorways, broken by posts, beams, hanging tack, and the shifting bodies of animals. A horse turns its head at the sound of entry. Another stamps once, impatient with the day before the day has properly introduced itself. Somewhere a groom murmurs in the practical voice of a person who knows that calm is not a feeling. It is a technique. This is where the breath of war waits quietly. Not in the armoury, though the armoury will have its own argument to make. Not on the battlements, where the horizon teaches men to expect trouble. Here, among straw and leather, the military life of the fortress becomes warm-blooded. A sword may be a symbol. A horse is a responsibility, and an expensive one. Horses were not decorative accessories to the world of the mounted warrior. They were transportation, status, speed, reach, shock, communication, and survival bound into a living body that needed constant care. A fortress that neglected its horses was not merely untidy, it was weakening itself. Patrols slowed. Messages failed. Escorts became harder. A mounted force could not remain mounted in theory. The animals had to be fed. They had to be groomed. Their feet had to be watched. Their tack had to be checked with the sort of seriousness that modern people reserve for brakes on a car. Except the car can bite you and develop opinions about puddles. There is a temptation to describe the Templar horse as if it were already charging across a battlefield, mane flying, hooves striking sparks, the rider transformed into some terrible image of holy war. But that is not where most of the story lives. Most of the story lives here, in preparation, in the hand running down a leg to feel for swelling, in the scrape of a brush through a coat, in the inspection of a girth, a strap, a buckle, a worn place in the leather that will become dangerous if ignored. The stables make heroism dependent on maintenance. That is a useful humiliation for legend. Mounted warfare could look glorious from a distance, especially after poets and painters had time to improve the lighting. Up close, it required grooms, fodder, water, smiths, space, patience, and a great deal of cleaning. A horse does not become part of a sacred military mission simply because the man beside it has taken vows. It remains stubbornly physical. It sweats. It startles. It eats. It grows lame. It needs attention before it offers service. The Templar Order understood the value of horses because its work demanded movement. Roads had to be watched. Travelers might need escort. Messages had to travel between houses, commanders, ports, fields, and fortified places. In frontier regions especially, distance could become danger very quickly. A rider could carry warning, authority, news, orders, or reassurance. Without horses, the fortress becomes less of a node in a wider network and more of a stone island. But horses turn stone into reach. A patrol leaving the gate extends the fortress into the landscape. A messenger arriving at speed brings the outside world through the walls before the dust has settled. A mounted brother or sergeant can appear where a foot traveler would arrive too late. The stable, then, is not a side room in the story. It is one of the engines of the whole place. Listen for a moment. The sounds are softer than battle and more revealing. A rope sliding against wood. The wet breath of an animal in the cold morning. The faint jingle of metal fittings, straw crushed under hooves. A hand patting a neck, not sentimentally, but to steady and reassure. A groom's low instruction. The creak of leather as tack is lifted, inspected, set down again. In a sleepier story, these sounds might fade into atmosphere, but historically, they are the work. A fortress can have high walls and stern prayers and still be undone by bad logistics. Too little fodder, poorly cared for animals, worn equipment, a shortage of trained hands. A commander may speak of vigilance and duty, but the stable asks a more basic question. Have you prepared the creatures on which your plans depend? There is no romance in that question, which is why it is trustworthy. The men who cared for the horses may not have occupied the brightest place in the legend, yet their skill mattered every day. A nervous animal had to be managed without panic. A saddle had to sit properly. A hoof problem could not be solved by courage. The stable required a kind of intelligence that is easy for written history to miss because it does not always leave dramatic documents behind. It lives in touch, timing, experience, and the memory of what went wrong last time. Perhaps one horse dislikes being approached from a certain side. Perhaps another eats too quickly. Perhaps a third is reliable on the road, but difficult near other animals. These are not grand historical facts, and we should not pretend to know them about any particular Templar horse, unless a source tells us. But they are the kind of knowledge every working stable accumulates. The past was filled with such small expertise. Without it, the larger institutions we study would have stumbled over their own feet or hooves. The brothers themselves would have known this, even if not all of them did the same stable work. The mounted warrior depends on people and animals he does not fully control. That dependence is spiritually interesting, though no one may have described it that way at the time. A man trained for command has to trust a groom's care, a smith's work, a horse's nerve, the soundness of leather, the quality of feed, the condition of a road after rain. War, for all its violent certainty, rests on fragile arrangements. Inside the stable, that fragility is visible. A strap can snap. A horse can sicken. A shoe can loosen. A supply of fodder can run low. The animal chosen for a patrol may not be ready. The distance on a map may look simple until heat, mud, injury, or fear adds its own corrections. The stable is where the fortress admits that strength is never a single thing. It is a chain of care, and care takes time. So the morning continues in strokes and checks, brush through coat, hand over flank, leather lifted, bent, examined, buckle tested, feed measured, water carried, straw moved. The smell grows stronger as the day warms, and the stable becomes less a hidden chamber than a working lung, breathing animal life into the military body of the fortress. Outside, the courtyard remains busy, but in here, the pace is different. Not slower because less is happening, but slower because haste can be punished. Startle a horse at the wrong moment, and the fortress will receive an immediate lecture in humility. The animals require steadiness from the humans around them. In this way, the stable imposes its own discipline, separate from the chapel, but not entirely unrelated to it. A monk learns obedience from rule. A horseman learns obedience from reality. Both can be stern teachers. There is also something intimate about this space that contrasts sharply with the public face of the fortress. On the walls, men are seen as defenders. In the chapel, as brothers under God. In the courtyard, as parts of a working system. But in the stable, a man is judged by whether an animal trusts his hands. That kind of judgment is immediate and difficult to fake. The horse does not care about the order's reputation. It cares about pressure, smell, memory, pain, food, fear, and the person standing near its head. For all the Templars' later fame, for all the accusations, myths, trials, and stories that would gather around them, much of their daily strength depended on these quiet relationships between human discipline and animal patience. A fortress could declare a mission. A horse had to carry it. By now, one animal is being prepared for movement, perhaps for a patrol, perhaps for a message, perhaps only for exercise or inspection. We do not need to invent urgency where none is required. The saddle is brought. The tack settles into place. Hands move with practiced care. The horse shifts, accepts, resists slightly, accepts again. The morning light from the doorway catches dust in the air and the curve of a neck. No battle has begun. No enemy has appeared. Yet the possibility of war has a pulse here. It is not loud. It is not glorious. It breathes through nostrils, warms the stable, bends its head toward feed, and waits to be led out. And when the horse finally steps into the courtyard, iron shoes touching the ground one after another, the fortress seems to widen. The walls are still walls. The gate is still guarded. But now the road has entered the story again. The armoury is not as loud as imagination wants it to be. No clash of steel, no heroic music hiding behind the door. No row of perfect weapons waiting, as if arranged for a museum after hours. The room is quieter than that, more practical, and in some ways more unsettling, because nothing here needs to move in order to be threatening. In the half-light, the objects keep their patience. Mail rests in heavy folds. Helmets sit with the blankness of faces that have forgotten their owners. Spears lean where they can be reached. Shields wait with their surfaces marked by use, repair, weather, and handling. Swords may be stored with care, not because they are magical, but because neglected metal becomes unreliable metal, and unreliable metal is a very poor companion when the gate alarm sounds. The armoury is a room built around a possibility, not constant battle, not daily violence. Possibility. That distinction matters. If we imagine the Templar fortress as a place permanently trembling on the edge of combat, we flatten the life inside it into melodrama. Most days in many fortresses would have contained more waiting than fighting, more maintenance than glory, more checking than charging. The weapons were not always in use, but they were always part of the atmosphere, like a sentence left unfinished. A man entering this room does not need to be reminded that danger exists. The room has already done that. The smell is different from the stable, less warm, less alive. Here the air holds oil, leather, iron, dust, old wood, and the faint dry scent of things kept ready but not exposed too long to weather. A strap hangs from a peg. A scabbard rests in shadow. A crossbow, depending on the period, place, and available equipment, might be among the stored arms. Details like that should be tied carefully to the particular fortress before being stated too firmly. But the broader truth remains. A fortified house required weapons, armor, and the labor of keeping them serviceable. Serviceable is not a romantic word. It may be the most honest word in the room. A sword in a legend is a destiny. A sword in an armory is an object that must be cleaned, stored, inspected, issued, returned, and repaired. Mail is not a glittering second skin placed on a warrior by poetry. It is weight, it is links, it is chafing, it is rust waiting for moisture and neglect. A helmet is not only an emblem of knighthood, it is discomfort shaped into protection. The armory strips war of its decoration before war has even begun. Look closely, and the room becomes a school of consequences. Every object suggests a body. A shield implies an arm behind it. A helmet implies a skull worth saving. A spear implies distance, force, training, and the unpleasant fact that another human being may come close enough to require it. A leather strap implies that the grand machinery of war can depend on something small, flexible, and easy to overlook. That is one of the recurring lessons inside the fortress. Important things fail in humble ways. A gate hinge, a saddle girth, a cracked bucket, a dull edge, a rotting beam, a frayed cord. The mythology of military orders prefers shining symbols, but survival is often decided by maintenance. The armory understands this without speeches. It asks its questions silently. Has the blade been cared for? Has the mail been checked? Are the shields sound? Is the equipment where it should be when the hour turns bad? The men who handle these objects live with a strange intimacy. Weapons are not abstractions to them, nor are they necessarily objects of swagger. In a disciplined religious military house, a weapon could be both necessary and morally charged. It belonged to duty, but duty did not make it harmless. The sword hanging in the dimness is not evil because it is a sword. It is not holy because a vowed man may carry it. It is a tool whose meaning depends on use, command, belief, and circumstance. That uncertainty is part of the Templar story. The Order's defenders could present armed service as sacred protection. Its critics, especially in later hostile contexts, could see arrogance, violence, wealth, or corruption. Modern imagination often runs even farther, adding symbols and secrets until the actual objects disappear beneath interpretation, but stand in the armory before the day grows hot, and a simpler truth presses forward. These men prepared for violence as part of a religious life, not outside it, within it. That is more disturbing and more historically interesting than any easy accusation or easy praise. The armory is not hidden away as an embarrassment, nor displayed like a trophy room. It is necessary. A fortress without arms is a promise it cannot keep. If the walls announce protection, the armory supplies the grammar of that promise. Yet the presence of weapons also changes the meaning of peace. A peaceful morning inside such a fortress is not innocent in the way a meadow might be innocent. It is peace under guard, peace with mail hanging nearby, peace with leather straps drying in dim air, peace with the knowledge that men who prayed before dawn may later be ordered to take up steel. Nothing has happened, but readiness has already shaped everything. This is why the half-light suits the room. Full daylight might make it too plain. Darkness would turn it into fantasy. The half-light lets it remain what it is, neither shrine nor nightmare, but a store of prepared force. Someone lifts a piece of equipment and feels its weight. The movement is practiced, not theatrical. A buckle is checked. A damaged strap is set aside. A blade receives attention not as a symbol, but as a surface with edges and weaknesses. Metal rewards neglect with betrayal. Leather remembers strain. Wood can split. Cord can fail. Every material has its own honesty, and the armory is where men must listen to it. There may be rules about access, storage, responsibility, and issue, though the details would vary and should not be invented too neatly. In any disciplined fortress, especially one tied to a military order, arms could not simply be treated as personal clutter. They had to belong to the system. Weapons lying in the wrong place are not merely untidy. They are disorder waiting to become danger. Order, again, is the invisible architecture. The chapel orders the soul. The refectory orders appetite. The stable orders movement. The armory orders force. Each space teaches the same lesson in a different language. Nothing here is supposed to belong entirely to private desire. A man does not eat only because he wants. He does not sleep only when he wishes. He does not ride without preparation. He does not take up a weapon as an individual impulse. The fortress works by bending human energy into form. Whether the men inside always lived up to that form is another matter. They were human. That cannot be said too often, because legend has a habit of either polishing people into icons or blackening them into villains. A brother might handle a sword with reverence, impatience, boredom, confidence, fear, or habit. One man may see an instrument of service. Another may feel the old pride that armed men have often felt when weight and training meet in the hand. The rule can command conduct. It cannot make every private feeling pure, but it can make the feeling answerable. That may be the point. Inside the armory, even violence is not allowed to imagine itself free. It is catalogued, stored, checked, restrained until called upon. The room does not celebrate the weapon. It disciplines it. And perhaps that is the only way such a life could be made bearable to those who believed in it. If war had to be near, then war must be placed under rule. If men had to carry steel, then steel must be framed by prayer, obedience, and command. The danger, of course, is that framing violence in sacred language can also make it easier to justify. The same structure that restrains can also sanctify. The Templar fortress lives inside that difficulty without resolving it for us. A shield is moved, revealing a paler patch on the wall behind it. A helmet is turned slightly toward the light. Dust gathers where hands do not often reach. The room has waited through the night and may wait through the day. That is its ordinary work. Waiting, holding, keeping readiness close enough to touch, but not yet released into the courtyard. Outside, the sounds of labor continue. Horses breathe. Men speak. A gate opens or closes with a controlled heaviness. The fortress carries on its mourning. Here, the weapons remain still. Their stillness is not peace. It is restraint. And restraint in this room feels less like gentleness than tension held in the hand. To reach the battlements, you climb into the wind. The stair is narrow enough to make the body remember where it is. One hand finds the wall. The steps are uneven from use, damp in places, worn by feet that came this way with very different thoughts. Boredom, caution, irritation, alarm, prayer still lingering from the chapel, or the simple desire to finish a shift and get warm. Then the stair opens. The world appears all at once. After the enclosure of chapel, refectory, stable, and armoury, the battlements feel almost too exposed. The sky is wider than it seemed from the courtyard. The air moves harder here, scraping over the wall, worrying at cloth, finding gaps near the throat and wrist. Below, the fortress gathers itself into shapes: roof lines, yard, gate, stable entrance, men reduced by height into small working figures. Above, there is only weather, and beyond the walls the land waits. It may be a road crossing a dry plain. It may be a valley still holding morning mist. It may be a coastal route where light lies flat on the water. It may be hills, scrub, fields, tracks, or desert depending on the fortress we choose to stand within. The exact landscape belongs to the specific site, and we should not pretend all Templar strongholds looked out over the same view, but the function of the view was shared. The wall taught men to look outward, not vaguely, not romantically, precisely. A road is not just a road from up here. It is a line of approach. A bend is not just a bend. It is a place where someone disappears. A ridge is not just a ridge. It is concealment, warning, distance, or relief depending on who is crossing it and why. The horizon is not scenery. It is information that has not yet become legible. A fortress survives by reading small changes. Dust where no dust was expected. A rider moving faster than a merchant should. A group stopping too long before the gate. Animals restless in a pattern that might mean nothing, or might mean something else is moving nearby. A light at the wrong hour. A silence on the road that usually carries traffic. None of these details proves danger by itself. But watchfulness lives in the space before proof. That is the strange discipline of the battlements. Most of the time, nothing happens. And because nothing happens, the work becomes harder. Anyone can stare into the distance when alarm has already been raised. It is much more difficult to keep attention alone through ordinary hours, when the wind is cold, the stones are uncomfortable, and the landscape seems determined to remain exactly what it was a moment ago. The wall demands a kind of patience that rarely becomes legendary. There are no songs for noticing nothing correctly. Yet noticing nothing correctly may be what keeps a gate from opening too easily, a patrol from leaving too late, or a messenger from being dismissed when he should have been heard. The watchtower sharpens this experience. From there, the fortress becomes both powerful and small. Powerful because it sees, small because everything beyond it is larger than the walls can control. The land stretches away indifferent to the discipline inside. Roads continue beyond sight. Villages, camps, ports, fields, hostile forces, friendly travelers, uncertain strangers, all of them exist outside the order of bells and rules. The fortress can interrupt the world. It cannot own it. That is one of the quiet truths the battlements reveal. From below, walls suggest certainty. From above, they reveal limits. The strongest wall still ends at the horizon. The best guard can only see so far. The most disciplined order still depends on news arriving through fallible human mouths, on weather that may hide movement, on alliances that may change, on local knowledge that outsiders may misunderstand. Stone creates confidence, but not omniscience. A Templar standing here would know the difference, at least if he had lived long enough to become honest. The wall gives height, not certainty. A tower gives range, not control. To watch the land is to admit that danger may already be present before it is understood. This is why the battlements do not feel triumphant. They feel lonely. Below, the courtyard has sound and pattern. Men pass one another. Tasks overlap. The fortress feels inhabited. Up here, even with another guard nearby, the mind is pulled outward into distance. The wind takes small noises away. A man becomes a figure between two immensities. The organized life behind him and the unresolved world ahead. There is a spiritual echo in that position. The Templar vocation, at least in its ideal form, stood between categories: monk and soldier, renunciation and armed service, prayer and patrol. The battlement turns that inward contradiction into geography. Behind the guard lies the disciplined house, with its chapel, table, rule, and hierarchy. Before him lies the road, where dust may mean commerce, pilgrimage, flight, or threat. His task is not to solve the world. It is to keep looking. The surrounding landscape also reminds us that a fortress was never isolated in the simple sense. It may feel alone, especially at dawn or in the long afternoon, but it belonged to networks of movement and dependence. Roads brought supplies, news, travelers, orders, rumors, and risk. Nearby communities might trade with it, serve it, resent it, rely on it, or fear it. A stronghold can look self-contained from a distance, but no fortress truly lives on stone alone. It needs the world it watches. That dependency complicates the image of pure separation. The gate controls passage, but passage must still happen. The stores may hold grain, but grain comes from somewhere. Horses need fodder, men need water, repairs need materials, information needs carriers. Even a military religious order that speaks the language of discipline cannot withdraw entirely from the ordinary mess of human exchange. The battlements show both sides of the relationship. The fortress watches the road because the road is dangerous. The fortress needs the road because without it, the fortress dies slowly. That is a sharper tension than any invented mystery. It turns the walls into something more intelligent than a barrier. They are a filter. They decide or try to decide what may enter and what must be kept out. Travelers, goods, messages, disease, rumor, fear, authority, violence. The gate below is the mouth, but the battlements are the eyes, and eyes grow tired. A guard shifts his weight. The stone underfoot is hard. The sun rises further, and shadows shorten along the outer wall. Far away, a bird moves low over the ground. A line on the road might be nothing more than a cart, or a pair of figures walking slowly, or the mind making patterns because the mind dislikes emptiness. The watcher must resist both errors, seeing too little and seeing too much. That balance is difficult. Fear invents enemies. Complacency misses them. Between those two failures, a fortress tries to live. This is another reason the Templar stronghold should not be imagined only through moments of crisis. Crisis is simple compared with watchfulness. Crisis tells the body what to do. Watchfulness asks the body to remain ready, while the mind is given very little evidence. It is a discipline of suspended judgment. It says, do not panic, but do not relax. Do not invent danger, but do not dismiss the possibility of it. The wall becomes a school of attention. Below, someone crosses the courtyard carrying something heavy. From above, the movement looks almost peaceful. A horse is led from one side of the yard to another. A door opens. A man pauses near the gate. The whole interior of the fortress seems to function in miniature, each figure following a path that makes sense only from within the daily order. Then you turn back to the horizon, and the miniature disappears. The outside world is too large to be reduced. Perhaps that is why so many fortresses, even in ruins, still produce a feeling of unease. We stand on their walls and admire the view, but the view was not built for admiration. It was built for suspicion. The beauty we notice may have been, for the men who lived there, a field of possible approach, concealment, exposure, and warning. A valley becomes beautiful after it no longer threatens you. A road becomes picturesque when no one is waiting to see who comes along it armed. The stones remember a less comfortable way of looking. For a while, nothing changes. The road remains the road. The wind continues. The guard remains at his post. That is not an empty scene. It is the scene on which the entire fortress depends. The chapel may order the soul. The stable may extend the body. The armoury may restrain force. But the wall keeps the question open. What is coming? Not as melodrama, as duty. And if the answer, for this hour, is nothing, then nothing must still be watched carefully. The battlements do not offer resolution. They offer perspective. From here, the fortress is revealed as a small, disciplined world surrounded by uncertainty, trying to impose form on fear with stone, routine, and human attention. It is both impressive and fragile, both commanding and dependent, both a shelter from the road and a servant of the road. The guard looks outward. Behind him, bells will ring again. Men will eat, pray, repair, groom, carry, and sleep lightly when allowed. Before him, the land remains unreadable beyond a certain distance. The wall does not change that. It only gives him a place to stand while he waits. The work without glory begins before anyone thinks to name it. It is not hidden exactly. It is everywhere. But because it does not look like legend, the eye slides past it. A man tightening a strap, another checking the fit of a gate bar, someone hauling water across the yard, with the careful walk of a person who has spilled enough in his life to know better. A brother inspecting a store of grain, a servant sweeping refuse away from a threshold, a craftsman bending over a repair that will be forgotten the moment it succeeds. This is the labor that makes history possible. Not the kind that receives songs, the kind that prevents disaster from becoming interesting. A fortress survives by avoiding certain stories. The story of the empty cistern, the story of the spoiled grain, the story of the gate that would not close, the story of the horse whose tack failed on the road. The story of a blade left to rust, a wall crack ignored too long, a storehouse poorly watched, a message delayed because no one had made ready for movement. Good maintenance is invisible because nothing happens. And nothing happening inside a fortress can be a triumph. By mid-morning, the courtyard has settled into a rhythm that is less dramatic than the first awakening, but more revealing. The early movements of prayer and meal have given way to the plain arithmetic of survival. How much water is stored? How much fodder remains? Which tools are sound? Which hinges need attention? Which animals require rest? Which men are assigned where? Which supplies must be guarded not against an army, but against damp, rot, vermin, carelessness, and the small thefts of ordinary life. The enemies of a fortress are not always outside the walls. Some arrive as weather, some as wear, some as fatigue, some as the quiet human belief that a task can wait until later. That belief has probably ruined more strongholds than courage ever saved. A cracked strap does not care that the brother wearing the mantle is brave. A neglected water source does not care that the chapel is orderly. Grain does not remain useful because the cause is sacred. Wood rots, iron corrodes, leather weakens, animals sicken, men forget. Every material inside the fortress is slowly negotiating with time, and time is extremely patient. So the work repeats. A hand checks the lock. A shoulder lifts a sack. A bucket descends into water. A blade is wiped clean. A cart is shifted out of the way. A store is counted, perhaps not with the neatness of a modern inventory, but with enough attention to know whether the house can endure what the day, the road, or the season might bring. This is not glamorous administration. It is the nervous system of the place. And the Templars, whatever else we make of them, were not only fighters in white mantles. They belonged to an organization that had to manage property, people, movement, obligations, and supplies across distance. That institutional side can feel dry until you stand inside the fortress and understand what it means in practice. A rule may command obedience, but someone still has to know where the spare leather is kept. A mission may be described in sacred terms, but someone still has to decide whether the grain is fit to use. A commander may speak of strategy, but a missing horseshoe can shrink a strategy very quickly. Reality has a talent for embarrassing grand language. The courtyard teaches this lesson without cruelty. It simply keeps producing tasks. A door needs repair. A roofline needs watching after rain. A wall walk must be kept clear. The kitchen needs fuel. The stable needs straw. The guards need relieving. The chapel needs its own care, because sacred spaces also gather dust, smoke, wax, damp, and wear. Even holiness has to be cleaned around. That detail is worth keeping, because the medieval religious imagination could lift the mind toward heaven, but the hand remained busy with earth. The brothers prayed under arches, but those arches had to be maintained. They spoke vows, but vows did not mend cloth. They lived for a mission, but missions require laundry, storage, accounting, and the occasional deeply unheroic argument over who last used a tool and failed to return it. We should allow them that humanity, not to mock them, but to rescue them from the false dignity of legend. People in the past did not live as symbols. They inhabited systems that were always slightly fraying. The stronger the institution, the more labor it required to appear strong. Discipline does not eliminate mess. It organizes the effort to keep mess from winning. Inside the fortress, this effort belongs to many hands. A knight brother might have duties shaped by status and rule, But the working life of the house depended on sergeants, servants, craftsmen, grooms, cooks, laborers, and others whose names usually disappear first. Their work sits beneath the famous image of the order like the foundation beneath a wall. Remove it, and the wall remains impressive for a while. Then it cracks. A man repairing tack may never be remembered. Yet a patrol depends on him. A cook managing a plain meal may never enter the legend. Yet hungry men become weak, angry, careless men. A laborer drawing water may seem far from the story of sacred warfare. Yet without water, the entire story collapses into thirst. This is where daily life becomes morally interesting, because the order valued obedience, and obedience is not only shown in grand moments. It appears in boring ones, perhaps especially there. The man who stands firm in battle is easy to admire. The man who performs a necessary task for the 1000th time without applause is harder to notice, but he may be closer to the actual texture of the life. There is a kind of humility in repair. Repair admits that things are breakable. It admits that yesterday's effort is not enough for today. It admits that strength is temporary unless renewed. A fortress, despite all its stone confidence, is really a bargain made with decay. The walls promise endurance. The workers know the promise must be maintained. So the day continues in small acts of resistance against failure. A loose hinge is tightened, a frayed rope replaced, a weapon cleaned, a barrel shifted away from damp, a horse's feed checked, a stair cleared of debris, a gate mechanism tested not with drama, but with the practical suspicion of someone who does not want to discover a problem during an alarm. The soundscape of the fortress has changed now. The solemn notes of dawn have given way to the muted percussion of work. Scraping, lifting, dragging, closing, pouring, brushing, hammering at a careful distance from the chapel's quiet authority. These sounds do not break the discipline of the place. They express it differently. The chapel says the day belongs to God. The work says the day still has to be managed. Neither cancels the other. This is one of the more subtle truths of religious military life. The sacred mission did not free anyone from the ordinary. It intensified the ordinary by placing it under obligation. A poorly kept fortress was not merely inefficient. It could be a failure of duty. Neglect could become a moral problem, because negligence endangered the community, the mission, the traveler at the gate, the brother on patrol, the stores entrusted to the house. Even dust can become theological, if enough discipline is built around it. Not that anyone would have phrased it so neatly while sweeping. A worker in the yard is unlikely to pause with a bucket and announce that he is participating in the moral architecture of the order. More likely, he wants the bucket moved, the task finished, the path cleared, the superior satisfied, the weather to improve, and perhaps for someone else to stop standing exactly where he needs to pass. That is why the scene feels real. Meaning does not always feel meaningful while it is being lived. Much of life, even inside an institution covered in later legend, is performed under the humble pressure of necessity. The great themes, obedience, survival, sacred duty, military readiness, pass through hands that may be cold, cracked, bored, skilled, irritated, or tired. By midday, the work has accumulated without becoming a story, and perhaps that is its story. The fortress still stands because hundreds of small failures have been delayed, corrected, or prevented. No one outside the walls may know it. No chronicler may write it. No later mythmaker may find it useful. But the order of the house depends on it as surely as it depends on prayer. We often search the past for decisive moments. A battle, a trial, a betrayal, a command, a death. Those moments matter, but they rest on long stretches when people simply kept things from falling apart. The gate closed because someone maintained it. The horse rode because someone cared for it. The men ate because someone stored and prepared food. The chapel gathered the brothers because someone kept the space usable. The wall watched the horizon because someone kept the stair passable and the parapet clear. The heroic image stands on ordinary labor and pretends it is standing alone. Inside the fortress, no one has that luxury. A brother crosses the courtyard, his mantle catching a little dust near the hem. A servant steps around him with a load that cannot wait. A groom calls from the stable. A guard descends from the wall, face reddened by wind. A man near the gate tests the heavy timber with both hands, then looks satisfied in the quiet way of someone who has found no problem. That satisfaction will not be recorded. It should still be honored. Because in a Templar fortress, as in most human institutions, the absence of disaster was often manufactured by people doing work that history forgot to admire. By midday, the fortress has lost the softness of morning. The sun is higher now, and the stones have begun to return the heat or glare they have gathered. The courtyard is no longer mysterious. It is exposed. Every bucket, threshold, repair, and tired face seems clearer than it did at dawn. The day has become physical. This is the hour when discipline has to survive fatigue. Morning can carry a certain force of beginning. Even cold obedience has momentum when the bell first calls and the world is still assembling itself. But midday is different. The body has been used. Men have climbed stairs, crossed yards, lifted, watched, carried, checked, corrected, waited. Horses have been handled. Gates have been opened and closed. The road has been observed. Small problems have presented themselves, as they always do, with the quiet confidence of things that expect to be dealt with. And now the community returns to food. Again, not as celebration, as order. The dining space receives them with the plain authority of repetition. The tables are not surprised to see them. The benches have no interest in whether a man feels spiritually elevated, physically sore, or privately annoyed by someone else's incompetence near the stores earlier that morning. The room has one demand: enter the pattern. Sit, receive, eat. Restrain yourself. The exact meal depends on time, place, season, supply, and the particular customs being followed. We should not dress the table too confidently with specific dishes unless a chosen source supports them. Bread, drink, simple fare, perhaps foods shaped by local conditions and religious rules. These are safer as broad possibilities than as a fixed menu. The details need verification before they become narration with a straight face. But the emotional truth of the meal is clearer. This is food under rule. And by midday, that rule is harder. Hunger after labor has a different voice from hunger before sunrise. It is less abstract. It has evidence. The arms know what they have carried. The legs remember the stairs. The back remembers the awkward weight lifted badly because there was no graceful way to lift it. A guard who has stood in wind and sun may feel the table not as a symbol of humility, but as relief. A groom may smell more of horse than chapel. A worker may arrive with dust in the folds of his clothing and a private hope that the portion will be enough. This is where the spiritual discipline becomes more than an idea. Restraint is easy to admire from outside. Inside a tired body, restraint becomes an argument. The order asks the men not to turn need into indulgence. It asks them not to let appetite become noisy just because the morning has been long. It asks them to remain shaped by obedience when comfort is close enough to taste. In a way, the midday meal is a quieter test than prayer before dawn. At dawn, the body is pulled from sleep. At midday, it has earned its hunger, and that makes the hunger more persuasive. The room answers persuasion with form. There may be silence. There may be prescribed conduct. There may be readings, depending on the practice observed. There is hierarchy, because medieval religious houses did not become modern democracies simply by eating together. But there is also a shared narrowing of behavior. Men who may differ in rank and task are still brought under the discipline of the table. Food moves through the room, not lavishly, not theatrically. The sound is familiar now. The small scrape of vessels, the creak of wood, the movement of cloth, the controlled rhythm of eating without turning the meal into performance. If someone reads aloud, the voice gives the hunger a companion it did not request. Words pass over bread. Instruction passes over thirst. The soul is not permitted to vanish just because the stomach has made a strong case. There is something almost severe about that. And yet, it is not simply denial. The body is being fed. The order does not pretend men can patrol walls, tend horses, keep watch, and maintain a fortress on pious thoughts alone. Medieval discipline could be harsh, but it was not usually stupid about the basic fact that bodies fail when neglected. Food is necessary. The question is not whether the body may be sustained. The question is whether the self may expand around the sustaining. That is the tension at the table. A fortress teaches men that almost everything can become dangerous if left ungoverned. A gate must be governed, or anyone may enter. A weapon must be governed, or force becomes disorder. A horse must be governed, or power becomes panic. Appetite must be governed, or the inner life becomes another unguarded road. This may sound austere to us, and it was austere, but it also reveals a worldview in which discipline linked things we tend to separate. Eating, praying, watching, riding, obeying, fighting, sleeping, all could be placed under a single moral pattern. The Templar life did not leave much room for the idea that private habits were merely private. The man who could not master himself at table might not be trusted to master himself elsewhere. Whether that logic was always fair is another matter. Institutions often make beautiful theories out of control. They can call discipline virtue even when it becomes rigidity. They can call obedience holy even when it silences necessary judgment. We do not have to romanticize the rule in order to understand its power. A life like this could produce endurance, solidarity, and focus. It could also grind the individual down until the difference between humility and erasure became difficult to see. The midday meal sits near the center of that ambiguity. It is care and it is control. It restores the body and reminds the body that it is not sovereign. Across the room, a brother lowers his eyes. Another eats with the automatic neatness of long habit. Someone younger perhaps struggles to move at the expected pace, neither too eager nor too slow. A senior figure may notice more than he appears to notice. The rules of such places are not only written, they live in glances, pauses, corrections, and the quiet pressure of being seen. That pressure could be heavy, but it could also be stabilizing. For men living in a fortress, surrounded by uncertainty, routine may have offered a kind of shelter. The road outside might bring rumor, danger, or need. The horizon might remain unreadable. Supplies might run low, Weather might change, orders might arrive, but the meal has a form, the room has a pattern. The act of eating belongs to a day that has not fallen apart. There is comfort in that, even when the comfort is strict. The mistake would be to imagine silence as emptiness. Around the table, thoughts are moving. A guard may replay something seen on the road, uncertain whether it mattered. A groom may worry over an animal that did not eat well. A commander may be measuring stores in his mind. A servant may be thinking only of the work that will follow the clearing of the meal. A brother may try to keep his attention on the reading, and fail, and return, and fail again. Human concentration has always been a fragile creature, even under vows, especially under vows perhaps, because a vow gives the wandering mind something to push against. Outside, the heat gathers, the courtyard waits, but not patiently. Tasks do not disappear because men are eating. The wall will need its watch. The stables will need attention. The gate will need judgment. The stores will need order. The chapel will call them again in its own time. The day is not half finished in any meaningful emotional sense. It has only changed its weight. Midday is when the body learns that morning was not the whole test, and this is where the Templar fortress becomes most believable, not in grand extremes, but in sustained pressure. The pressure to continue, to keep the rule when tired, to take food without turning toward softness, to return to labor without applause, to live as though every ordinary action reveals whether the vow has entered the bones or remains only on the lips. We cannot know how each man answered that pressure. Some may have found peace in it. Some may have resented it. Some may have needed it, because the structure held them together better than freedom would have done. Others may have worn obedience outwardly, while the inner life remained more complicated, more restless, more human than any rule could comfortably admit. The meal ends, again, not with drama. The benches shift. Vessels are moved. Men rise into the next obligation. The room that briefly gathered the community begins to release it back into the heat and work of the fortress. Whatever strength the food has given will be spent almost immediately, converted into steps, commands, repairs, watchfulness, and restraint. No feast has occurred. No legend has been fed. Only men. Men who must now return to the wall, the stable, the gate, the stores, the road, the disciplined machinery of a life that permits very little to exist for itself alone. The table empties. The rule remains. The sleeping quarters are not waiting with comfort. They are waiting with permission. That is a different thing. By the time the day has passed its middle weight, the thought of rest may begin to appear in the body before it appears in the mind. A man does not need to say he is tired. His shoulders know. His eyes know. His hands know from the way they pause a fraction longer on a strap, a latch, a tool, a cup. Fatigue settles into small decisions long before it becomes visible as weakness. But inside a Templar fortress, rest is not simply taken. It is fitted into the rule. The exact sleeping arrangements would depend on the site, the period, and the layout of the house, so we should avoid pretending that every fortress had the same dormitory shaped to the same plan. In some places, communal sleeping spaces may have followed patterns familiar from religious life. In others, practical conditions may have altered the arrangement. What matters for this journey is the principle. Sleep was not a private kingdom. It belonged to the discipline of the house. That alone makes the room feel different. A modern bedroom is often imagined as the last defended province of the self. A door closes, and the world is supposed to step back. The bed becomes a place of preference, softness, memory, disorder, even small rebellion. One person wants darkness, another wants air. Someone reads too late, someone hides from the day. The room takes the shape of the individual. Here, the individual has much less room to expand. A sleeping space inside the fortress would be practical, limited, and communal in spirit, even where divisions existed. Bodies resting near other bodies, clothing and equipment kept according to rule or necessity. The smell of wool, leather, human fatigue, old straw or bedding materials depending on what was used, and stone that never quite stops being cold. The air may hold the residue of the day, sweat from labor, smoke from lamps or fires, damp from walls. The blunt fact of men living too close for modern delicacy. There is no romance in that. There is honesty. The first thing a place like this teaches about sleep is that sleep can be obedient. Men lie down not because the world has become gentle, but because the schedule, the body, and the needs of the house require restoration. Rest is not indulgence. It is maintenance, no less than cleaning a weapon or feeding a horse. A tired man becomes a danger to himself and others. He misses signs. He handles tools poorly. He grows sharp in temper. He mistakes impatience for judgment. So the fortress allows sleep, but it does not surrender to it. That is the second lesson. Even at rest, the community remains interruptible. A bell may call, a watch may change, an alarm may rise from the gate, a horse may panic, a messenger may arrive with news that cannot politely wait for dawn. A brother may be required for prayer before the body feels restored. The sleeping room is therefore not a place where duty disappears. It is a place where duty loosens its grip only temporarily. That changes the nature of rest. To sleep in such a fortress is to sleep inside readiness. The walls may be thick, but they do not erase the road. The gate may be barred, but it does not abolish the possibility of arrival. The chapel may have ordered the day, but it will order the night as well. Sacred time does not become sentimental after sunset. It continues, dividing darkness into hours that belong to prayer as much as to dreams. A man lying down in this space is never fully alone. He hears breathing nearby, perhaps a cough held back, perhaps a shift of weight, perhaps the low sound of someone settling into discomfort with the patience of long practice. Another man may fall asleep quickly, with the enviable cruelty of those who can rest anywhere. Someone else may remain awake, staring into dark rafters or stone, not because he has a grand secret, but because fatigue does not always become sleep when commanded. The body can obey the rule and still betray the man. That small failure is deeply human. We should not imagine the brothers drifting into peaceful rest every night beneath a perfect veil of devotion. Some nights may have been still. Others may have been restless. Cold can keep a man awake. Heat can do the same. Insects, noise, worry, pain, hunger, the ache of old injuries, the anticipation of a task at an unpleasant hour. These are not dramatic, but they are powerful. They are the ordinary enemies of sleep, and the past had fewer remedies for them. The sleeping quarters reveal a quieter side of discipline, because here the body cannot perform strength. A man asleep has set down part of his public self. The knight is no longer mounted. The guard is no longer scanning the horizon. The brother is no longer visibly composed in chapel. He is simply a tired human form under coverings, vulnerable to cold, dreams, illness, and interruption. For an order so wrapped in later myth, this vulnerability matters. Legends prefer wakefulness. They prefer secrecy in the night, councils behind closed doors, hidden rituals, strange lights moving under old arches. And yes, medieval institutions had their mysteries, as all closed communities do. But most nights in most places were probably less theatrical. Men slept, men snored, men turned over. Men were woken before they wanted to be. The extraordinary reputation of the Templars rested on thousands of ordinary nights no one thought to record. That is not a disappointment. It is the point. A fortress is not made real by adding more drama to it. It becomes real when we understand how much of its life was spent in states between drama, waiting, repairing, eating, praying, and trying to sleep before the next demand arrived. The dormitory, or whatever sleeping arrangement the house used, also reminds us that communal life is not automatically gentle. To live under rule is to be constantly near others. That nearness can create solidarity. It can also create friction. The man beside you is your brother in discipline, but he may also breathe too loudly, move too often, smell of horse, mutter in sleep, or possess one of those small habits that becomes unbearable only because there is no escape from it. Community is not an abstract virtue when someone is coughing beside you in the dark. And yet, the shared discomfort may have strengthened the order's inner life, not in a sentimental way, but through repetition. Men who wake together, pray together, eat under the same restrictions, labor under the same walls, and sleep within reach of one another are shaped by a common pressure. The self becomes less solitary. A brother's weakness is visible. So is his endurance. The rule does not allow everyone to disappear into separate worlds at night. It keeps them in one body. The metaphor is old, but here it feels literal. The fortress rests like a creature that never fully sleeps. Some limbs are still awake. The guard on the wall, the man at the gate, the servant finishing late work, the animal restless in the stable. Other limbs recover in darkness. Breath gathers in the sleeping space. The day's heat leaves the stones slowly. A lamp burns low or is put out according to need and practice. Somewhere a door closes carefully. The quiet is not empty. It is supervised. That may sound oppressive to modern ears, and perhaps sometimes it was. But for the men who accepted, inherited, endured, or entered this life, such supervision could also offer clarity. The world outside the walls might be unstable. The road might be dangerous. Politics could shift. Supplies could fail. Rumors could arrive faster than truth. But inside the rule, even sleep had a place. The day did not dissolve into personal drift. It returned the body to the pattern again and again. Still, no rule can fully govern dreams. That is a thought worth leaving in the room. A Templar brother might submit his speech, his clothing, his labor, his appetite, his obedience, and his waking hours to the order. But in sleep, the mind wanders where it will. Perhaps back to family, if he remembered them. Perhaps to battle, if he had seen it. Perhaps to fear, hunger, pride, temptation, prayer, or nothing at all. The sources cannot tell us. The darkness keeps that part, and we should let it. Not every silence in history needs to be filled. Some silences are more honest when left unclaimed. What we can say is that sleep inside the fortress was not a retreat from the Templar life. It was another part of it, limited, communal, interruptible, necessary. Rest shaped by duty, and duty softened only enough to keep the body from breaking. As the afternoon continues outside, the sleeping quarters may lie mostly empty, holding the promise of night. Blank spaces where tired men will later return. Bedding arranged with whatever simplicity the house allows. Walls cooling slowly. The air still. A room without drama, yet full of meaning, because every person inside the fortress will eventually become powerless before the need it represents. Even warriors who lived like monks had to sleep. Even men under vows had bodies that demanded darkness. And when they finally lay down, the fortress did not become peaceful. It merely lowered its voice. Not everyone inside the fortress wears the white mantle. That is easy to forget, because history has a way of dressing the past in its most recognizable costume and letting everyone else fade into the wall. The Night Brother is visible. He has the stronger image, the sharper outline, the red cross that later imagination can seize and enlarge. He is the figure who survives on book covers, in paintings, in games, in arguments about crusade and power and secrecy. He is useful to myth because he looks like a myth before the myth has even begun. But the fortress does not run on visible men alone. It runs on the people standing just outside the bright circle of attention. A sergeant may pass through the yard with duties of his own, perhaps armed, perhaps mounted, perhaps carrying responsibilities that place him close to the military work of the order, without giving him the same status as a night brother. A groom moves between animals with the patience of someone whose day can be ruined by one nervous horse. A cook works near heat, smoke, knives, grain, vessels, and the endless problem of turning supplies into meals without turning discipline into complaint. A blacksmith or metal worker may handle repairs that decide whether equipment remains useful. Laborers lift, haul, clear, and mend. Servants carry the day on their backs. Their lives are not decorative. They are structural. If the famous brothers are the face of the fortress, these people are its hands, joints, stomach, and breath. Remove them, and the religious military ideal becomes a beautiful theory trapped in a collapsing building. This is one of the most important corrections we can make when entering a place like this. A Templar stronghold was not simply a house full of knights waiting for history to give them a dramatic moment. It was a layered community, shaped by rank, vow, labor, necessity, and dependence. Some people inside the walls belonged directly to the order in recognized roles. Others may have been attached through service, employment, local obligation, or practical connection, depending on the site. The exact mix would vary, and we should be cautious before describing one fortress as though it speaks for all of them. But the broader point is firm. The white mantle needed a world around it, and that world was crowded with work. Consider the groom again, because the stable has already taught us that horses are not passive symbols. A knight may ride into memory, but someone else may have risen earlier to prepare the animal that carries him there. Someone has cleaned the stall, checked the feed, noticed the swelling, remembered the temper, adjusted the tack, and learned which horse tolerates which man. That knowledge may never appear in a chronicle, yet it can determine whether a patrol leaves safely, whether a message arrives, whether a rider survives the road. Skill does not become less historical because it is not noble. The same is true in the kitchen. The cook does not usually receive the reverence given to a commander, though hunger will reveal the cook's importance with impressive speed. Feeding a disciplined house is not a matter of abundance alone. It is timing, storage, fire, cleanliness by the standards of the world, portion, restraint, and adaptation to what is available. Too little food weakens the men. Too much indulgence may offend the spirit of the rule. Badly managed food invites sickness, waste, resentment, and disorder. The kitchen is not glamorous. It is dangerous when it fails. Then there is the smith, or the worker responsible for metal repairs, depending on the resources of the fortress. Iron has a moral quality in places like this, though not because it is magical. It tells the truth about use. A hinge wears, a shoe loosens, a buckle bends, a blade dulls, a rivet fails. Metal makes small complaints before it makes large betrayals, and someone has to understand the language of those complaints. This is another form of vigilance, not looking toward the horizon, but looking closely at the tool in the hand. The fortress requires both. And below these more specialized roles lies the endless labor of carrying water, carrying wood, carrying grain, carrying waste away, carrying messages from one part of the compound to another, carrying the invisible weight of repetition. Modern viewers often underestimate how much of pre-modern life was simply moving heavy things through inconvenient spaces, before engines, before plumbing, before switches and pipes and quiet systems hidden in walls. The body was infrastructure. A servant with a bucket is not background. He is the plumbing. A laborer with a load of wood is not atmosphere. He is the heating system, the kitchen's beginning, the evening's light, the meal's possibility. This is where the fortress becomes less romantic and more impressive. Its strength rests not only on walls, but on coordination between unequal people. Inequality is not an accident in this world. Rank mattered. Status mattered. Clothing, place at table, authority, speech, and obligation all marked difference. We should not smooth that away to make the past more comfortable. The men in white did not simply live among equals cheerfully sharing chores in a modern spirit of teamwork. Medieval institutions were built around hierarchy, and the Templar order was no exception. But hierarchy does not mean independence. The higher ranks depended on the lower in ways both obvious and quietly embarrassing. A commander could give an order, but someone had to make the order material. A brother could observe religious discipline, but someone had to bake, mend, fetch, clean, repair, groom, and guard the conditions that allowed that discipline to continue. Authority may flow downward. Necessity flows in every direction. That is the secret pressure beneath the orderly surface. Everyone needs someone. Even men trained to imagine themselves as servants of God and defenders of roads. There may also have been local workers or civilians connected to particular sites, especially where a fortress interacted with nearby settlements, estates, routes, or economic networks. Here again, the details require care. We should not invent a bustling civilian world for every stronghold, nor isolate every fortress as if it floated above local society. The evidence would need to guide us site by site. But we can say this: no fortress lives entirely alone. Its walls may define an inside, but supplies, labor, news, repairs, animals, and money tie it to people beyond the gate. This matters because it changes the moral texture of the place. The Templar fortress is often imagined as a closed order, self-contained, secretive, sealed, and in some ways, enclosure was part of its identity. But daily life would have required contact, exchange, command, negotiation, and dependence. A traveler might seek shelter, a messenger might bring instructions, a local supplier might bring grain, a worker might know the surrounding land better than the men who claimed authority over it. The wall separates, but it also creates a point of meeting. The overlooked people lived in that meeting place. They understood the fortress not as a symbol, but as a schedule of demands. They knew where the smells gathered, which superior was fair, which animal kicked, which door stuck, which brother was kind when tired and which became sharp, which path through the yard saved a few steps when carrying weight, which task could be delayed and which could not. Their knowledge was intimate, practical, and largely unrecorded. History often preserves command better than competence. That is unfortunate, because competence is what kept most days from becoming catastrophes. Imagine the courtyard for a moment, without the famous men at the center. Let the eye drift sideways. A servant wipes a vessel. A groom bends near a horse's leg. A worker adjusts a stack of supplies so damp will not creep in from the floor. Someone clears waste from a place where it would attract vermin. Someone else carries water with the resigned dignity of a person whose arms have learned not to complain where the mouth cannot. No single action seems important enough to stop the narration. Together, they are the life of the fortress. This is also where human tension would have lived. Different ranks do not simply coexist without friction. Orders can be resented. Labor can be unevenly valued. Religious discipline can look different from the kitchen than it looks from the chapel. A brother may speak of humility while someone of lower status does the dirtiest work nearby. That contradiction does not automatically make the order hypocritical, but it does remind us that medieval ideals moved through unequal bodies. Some people got to symbolize sacrifice. Others simply sacrificed time, strength, and comfort with no symbol attached. The legend rarely knows what to do with them, perhaps because they make the story less clean. Once we admit the fortress is full of cooks, grooms, servants, smiths, laborers, local ties, practical skills, and social divisions, the Templars become less like a sealed mystery and more like an institution, more complex, more dependent, more human. The drama does not vanish. It becomes better grounded. A locked room may be intriguing. A working community is harder to understand. By afternoon, many of these people have already carried the fortress through half a day. They may not appear at prayer in the same way, or eat in the same place, or sleep under the same conditions, depending on status and arrangement. Their obligations may differ sharply from those of the Knight brothers. Yet their labor sits beneath every solemn idea spoken inside the walls. Prayer needs a roof. Discipline needs food. War needs horses. Authority needs people willing, compelled, paid, bound, or trained to make it function. The white mantle moves through a world made possible by uncelebrated hands. And maybe that is the truest way to see the fortress now. Not as a shrine to a single kind of man, but as a layered human machine. Some parts visible, some hidden, some praised, some used until they disappear from memory. All of them necessary to keep the gate opening and closing, the chapel lit, the horses fed, the walls watched, the stores counted, and the day moving forward under the rule. The myth gives us knights. The fortress gives us everyone else. And without everyone else, the nights would not last a week. Afternoon does not arrive with a bell of its own. It settles. The light changes first. It leans across the courtyard at a lower angle, catching the uneven faces of the stones and turning small imperfections into long, thin shadows. The morning's sharp purpose has worn down into something slower. Men still work, but their movements have changed. Less beginning, more endurance. The day has been spent in portions, and everyone inside the fortress can feel how much remains before night closes the gate in earnest. On the watchtower, time moves differently. Below, the fortress is full of tasks that can be touched. Rope, bucket, hinge, harness, bowl, broom, blade, door. Up here, the work is almost entirely made of attention. A guard stands against the wind and looks outward over the land. The road lies beyond the walls, pale in the afternoon light. The distance has softened. Heat or dust may blur the edges of things. What seemed clear in the morning now wavers slightly, as if the world has grown tired of being watched. But the watcher cannot grow tired in the same way. Or rather, he can, but he cannot obey it. This is the difficult hour for vigilance. Dawn has drama because the world is being revealed. Night has drama because the world is being hidden. Afternoon is more treacherous because it feels ordinary. A road in the afternoon looks like a road. A field looks like a field. A slope looks empty. A distant figure may be nothing more than a traveler whose business is honest and dull, which is precisely the kind of person history rarely remembers. Still, the guard watches. A fortress is built partly on the refusal to trust appearances too quickly. Perhaps there is movement in the distance, not enough to raise an alarm, not enough to make the courtyard stop. Just a slight disturbance along the road, dust lifting where the air had been still, or a dark fleck moving between two pale stretches of ground. A rider, maybe. A cart. A small group on foot. It is too far to know, and that uncertainty is the whole point. Danger rarely introduces itself at the correct volume. Most of the time, it begins as an interpretation. The watcher narrows his eyes. He may call another man to look, or he may wait, because false alarm is also a kind of disorder. Inside a disciplined house, fear must be governed as strictly as appetite. If every dust cloud becomes a threat, the fortress exhausts itself. If no dust cloud is taken seriously, the fortress becomes arrogant. Between panic and complacency lies the narrow discipline of judgment. That discipline is not glamorous. It is mental labor performed in silence. From the tower, the fortress below seems almost peaceful. A horse stands in a patch of shade. Someone crosses the courtyard carrying a tool. A worker pauses near a doorway, perhaps stretching his back for one unapproved but deeply understandable moment. Near the gate, two men speak briefly, their gestures small. Life continues because no signal has yet broken it. This is how tension often lives in real places, not as a sudden chord of music, as divided attention. One part of the fortress continues the day. Another part asks whether the day is about to change. The afternoon watch is also when rumors can gain weight. A messenger may have arrived earlier with news from beyond the walls, or a traveler may have spoken of trouble on the road, or someone may have heard something from a nearby settlement that was already third-hand by the time it reached the gate. The medieval world moved on reports as much as on facts. Information came in human form, carrying fear, exaggeration, fatigue, self-interest, honest confusion, and sometimes truth. A fortress had to listen without believing everything. That is harder than it sounds. We, with all our modern devices and archives and maps, still struggle with rumor. Imagine judging the reliability of distant news when it arrives covered in dust, spoken by a tired mouth, shaped by local loyalties, translated through anxiety, and perhaps delivered by someone who wants shelter, food, payment, protection, or simply to be taken seriously. The watchtower looks outward, but the mind must also watch the story being told. A rider in the distance may be a messenger, a merchant, a scout, a frightened man, a liar, a servant of someone powerful, a nobody. The fortress cannot know immediately. It can only prepare to receive without surrendering judgment. The gate below will eventually make the question practical. Open? Wait? Challenge? Send someone? Inform a superior? Let the traveler come closer under observation? Stone walls create authority, but they do not remove uncertainty. They concentrate it at the gate. The sun continues its slow decline. The road grows longer in the light. If dust is rising, it now trails behind the movement like a faint confession. Someone on the wall shifts position. A hand rests near the stone. The watcher may not feel afraid exactly. Fear is too strong a word for every uncertain sight. Perhaps he feels only alertness sharpen, that inner tightening when the day stops being entirely routine. This is the kind of moment a sensational story would inflate. It would make the rider ominous. It would make the dust a warning. It would promise that everything is about to change. But most of history did not behave with such courtesy toward narrators. The rider might arrive with a mundane message. The dust might come from harmless travelers. The tension might dissolve into paperwork, stable space, a cup of water, and a short exchange at the gate. And yet the moment still matters, because it shows how the fortress was designed to live with uncertainty before uncertainty became event. That is one of the secret skills of such places. Not fighting, waiting intelligently, holding readiness without wasting it, letting the day continue while keeping one eye on the place where the day might be interrupted. Below, the workers begin to finish certain tasks. Not all tasks. A fortress is never finished in that generous sense. But some tools are put away. Some animals are settled. Some supplies are bouffed under cover. The light tells the body what the bell may later confirm. The day is turning. Evening will come, and with it a different form of caution. Afternoon is the hinge. Morning belongs to awakening and assignment. Night belongs to enclosure and prayerful unease. Afternoon belongs to assessment. What has been done? What remains exposed? Who is outside? Who must return before the gate closes? What has the road brought? What might still arrive? The watchtower gathers these questions without answering them. A bird moves over the land. A cart, perhaps, becomes clearer. Or perhaps the distant figure divides into two figures, then three. The watcher waits for scale to correct imagination. Distance lies by making small things seem harmless and large things seem impossible. Only time brings them into proportion. Inside the fortress, time is governed by bells. Outside, time is measured by approach, step by step, hoofbeat by hoofbeat, dust lifting, settling, lifting again. If a traveler comes near enough, the gate will become the center of the story again. The same gate that closed behind us at dawn, the same controlled mouth of the fortress. Its meaning changes with the hour. In the morning, it admitted the day. In the afternoon, it judges what the day has sent back. This is where the fortress feels most alive as an instrument. The tower sees, the gate questions, the courtyard absorbs, the chapel interprets, the stores sustain. The stable extends. The armoury waits. No part stands alone. A small movement on the horizon travels invisibly through the entire structure before anyone has crossed the threshold. That is what a fortress does. It turns distance into decision. The sun lowers another degree. The stones begin to lose their harsh glare. The air softens, but the watch does not. If anything, the coming evening makes judgment more urgent. Darkness will reduce certainty. A traveler who arrives late carries a different pressure from one who appears at noon. Mercy, suspicion, rule, hospitality, fear, all may gather at the gate in the fading light. And the men inside must decide how to be both guarded and human. That tension matters. A fortress that refuses everyone becomes cruelty with walls. A fortress that trusts everyone becomes a gift to its enemies. Somewhere between those failures lies the hard practice of medieval protection. To shelter, to question, to control, to defend, and sometimes to turn away. The Templars have often been imagined through grand moral categories. Holy warriors, fanatics, bankers, victims, villains, mystics, soldiers, monks. Some labels contain pieces of truth, others contain more appetite than evidence. But from this tower in the late afternoon, the order becomes something more immediate. Men responsible for a threshold in an uncertain world. That responsibility is not clean. The road does not only bring enemies, it brings the weak, the lost, the useful, the suspicious, the ordinary, the desperate. It brings people who need help and people who may abuse it. It brings news that may save lives and rumors that may waste them. To watch the road is to accept that human need and human danger often approach in similar shapes. Perhaps this is why the afternoon feels heavier than it should. Nothing has happened, and yet everything depends on how nothing is watched. The guard remains at his post. The courtyard below continues its careful decline toward evening. A horse is led back into shadow. A worker shoulders one last load. Near the gate, a man looks outward, waiting for a signal from above or a clearer view of the road. The fortress holds its breath only slightly, almost imperceptibly, as disciplined places learn to do. Far off, the dust continues. Maybe it is only a traveler. Maybe it is a messenger. Maybe it is nothing that history would ever bother to keep. But for the men on the wall, it is enough. Enough to look again. Evening enters the fortress through the gate. Not first through the sky. Not first through the chapel candles. Not first through the cooling stones. It arrives at the threshold, where the day's uncertainty must finally be judged. The road that seemed open in the afternoon now begins to narrow into shadow. Distances shorten. Shapes lose their edges. A person who could be studied at noon becomes harder to read as the light thins. So the gate becomes serious again. All day, it has opened and closed under watch. It has admitted movement, controlled passage, allowed the fortress to breathe without losing its guarded nature. But as night approaches, its meaning changes. A closed gate in daylight is caution. A closed gate after sunset is a statement. The world outside will remain outside. At least, that is the hope. Men move near the entry passage with the quiet efficiency of those who understand that evening procedures are not symbolic. They are protection. Timber is checked. Iron is handled. The heavy bar is readied. A final look may be taken along the road. If travelers or messengers have arrived late, someone must decide whether they are admitted, questioned, delayed, or refused according to the judgment of the house. Mercy and suspicion stand very close together at dusk. That is one of the uncomfortable truths of fortified life. Hospitality is easier in daylight. By evening, every stranger becomes more complicated. A tired traveler may genuinely need shelter. A messenger may carry news that cannot wait. A merchant may have misjudged the road. A pilgrim may be afraid. But darkness also gives cover to deception, confusion, and violence. A fortress that never opens its gate forgets its duty to the world beyond the walls. A fortress that opens too easily forgets the people already inside. So the gatekeepers live inside a moral problem. They may not describe it that way. They may simply do the work. Look. Question. Listen. Decide. But beneath the practical motions lies an old human dilemma. How do you protect without becoming cruel, and how do you show mercy without becoming careless? No wall can answer that by itself. The light drops further. The last tasks of the day begin to fold inward. In the courtyard, movement becomes more deliberate. A man brings in tools that should not be left exposed overnight. Supplies are covered or returned to storage. The stable grows louder for a brief period, as animals are settled, fed, checked, and made ready for the long, dark hours. Horses do not care that the fortress wants solemnity at night. They want food, space, and the reassurance of familiar hands. Weapons, too, return to their places, not because danger has vanished, but because order must be preserved even in readiness. A sword left carelessly near a doorway is not preparedness. It is negligence with a sharp edge. Crossbows, spears, shields, mail, helmets, straps, whatever the house holds and uses according to its period and resources, must be kept in the logic of the armoury. The day may end, but discipline cannot simply spill across the floor. There is relief in these repeated closures. The gate closes. The stable quiets. The stores are secured. The armory receives its silent objects. Doors settle into place. The fortress becomes less horizontal, less spread across the courtyard, and more inward again. Men who spent the day moving through tasks begin to return to the pattern of evening. The world of work contracts toward prayer, rest, and watchfulness. For a while, the stones release the heat they gathered during the afternoon. The air changes. The smells sharpen in the cooling. Straw, smoke, leather, dust, animals, the faint trace of food, the damp breath of masonry. Voices lower without anyone needing to command it. Darkness in a fortress has authority of its own. And then the chapel begins to matter again. Perhaps it never stopped mattering, but evening makes its presence more visible. A candle in daylight is almost an object. A candle after sunset becomes a small act of resistance. Flames appear where the stone would otherwise gather blackness. Men enter, not as they did in the fragile beginning of the day, but carrying the day's weight with them. Morning prayer shaped men before labor. Evening prayer receives them after it. That difference matters. At dawn, the brothers came as men being summoned into duty. At night, they come as men who have spent themselves under that duty, successfully or imperfectly. They have watched, eaten, carried, inspected, judged, obeyed, perhaps grown irritated, perhaps failed in patience, perhaps corrected themselves, perhaps not. The chapel does not need them to arrive as symbols. It receives them as the day has made them. This is where the rhythm of the fortress becomes almost circular, but not repetitive. The bell returns, yet the men are not the same as they were when it first sounded. A day inside the rule has passed through their bodies. The same arches now hold different fatigue. The same low voices may carry less sharpness, more weight. The same silence feels deeper because it follows labor rather than sleep. A man kneels with sore knees. That is not a grand historical revelation. It is probably closer to the truth than many grand revelations. The fortress at night is not peaceful in the simple sense. It is controlled. Peaceful things do not require guarded walls, barred gates, watch rotations, stored weapons, and men trained to wake when called. What settles over the stronghold is not safety, but order imposed against the possibility of fear. The night watch begins or continues. Some men will sleep, some will not. The wall still needs eyes. The gate still needs ears. The stable still needs someone who can respond if an animal panics. The chapel may grow dark after its candles are spent, but sacred time will return before the body feels ready. A fortress never gives the whole night away to rest. Outside the walls, the landscape changes character. The road becomes a memory of itself. The valley, plain, coast, or hillside loses detail. Distances become guesswork. Any sound travels differently. A hoofbeat, if it comes, may seem nearer or farther than it is. A voice may be swallowed by wind. A small light beyond the walls may mean a camp, a traveler, a trick of vision, or nothing at all. Darkness is not empty. It is crowded with possibilities. Inside, men know this. They may not fear it every night, but they respect it. Because only fools require fear before they take precautions. The fortress has been built on the understanding that danger does not need permission to exist. It may come. It may not. Either way, the gate must be closed properly. That word, properly, may be the most important word of evening. Not beautifully, not dramatically. Properly. The bar placed as it should be. The watch assigned. The animals checked. The tools put away. The weapons stored. The candles tended. The prayers said. The late arrivals accounted for. The courtyard cleared enough that movement in the dark will not become confusion. The community gathered, released, and gathered again by rule. This is how a day ends when personal comfort is not the highest law. There may be moments of softness, of course. A brief exchange between men who know each other too well. The quiet satisfaction of finishing a repair. The warmth near a fire. The relief of removing weight from the body. A groom speaking to a horse in the low, familiar tone that survives every century because animals still prefer kindness when it is available. A tired brother closing his eyes for a moment longer than he should. Discipline does not erase tenderness. It only gives it less room to announce itself. And perhaps that makes the small human gestures more valuable. In a place governed by rule, even a careful hand, a shared glance, a restrained joke, or a moment of patience can feel like warmth leaking through stone. Not rebellion, not sentimentality, just humanity continuing, quietly, inside a severe form of life. The chapel candles burn lower. The courtyard empties. The upper wall holds a figure against the last band of light. The gate is closed now, and the sound of it remains in the mind long after the timber has settled. It is the sound of a decision made for everyone. Those inside are held. Those outside are kept beyond. The fortress has chosen its night. But even closed walls do not end uncertainty. They only define where uncertainty begins. A man on watch looks outward into the darkening land. Behind him, prayer has faded into murmurs. then into movement, then into the quieter routines of night. Somewhere below, a horse exhales. Somewhere within the walls, a tired body lowers itself towards sleep. Somewhere in the chapel, wax softens around a flame. The day ends as it began, with order, with darkness, with the knowledge that the world beyond the walls has not gone away. And in that knowledge, the fortress keeps breathing. The legend is louder than the fortress. It has had centuries to become louder. The real place speaks in smaller sounds. A gate bar lowered into place, a horse shifting in straw, a bowl set down on a table, a tired man climbing a stair to watch a road that may bring nothing at all. But legend does not usually care for small sounds. Legend wants symbols large enough to survive distance. It wants red crosses bright against white mantles. It wants hidden treasure, secret rites, lost knowledge, betrayal, martyrdom, corruption, power. And the Templars gave history enough raw material to tempt almost everyone. They were religious men and military men. They became wealthy and influential. They occupied the charged landscape of crusade, pilgrimage, politics, and war. They answered to a structure that crossed ordinary borders of lordship and kingdom. They were praised, feared, needed, resented, and eventually destroyed in a storm of accusation and royal pressure that would make later imaginations even less willing to leave them alone. But inside the fortress, the myth has less room to stand upright. It keeps bumping its head on daily life. That may be the most useful thing this long, quiet day has shown us. The Templars were never only what their enemies said they were, never only what their admirers wished they had been, and never only what later conspiracy turned them into. They were also men living under rules in hard places, men dealing with hunger, horses, damp walls, sore bodies, bad weather, strained supplies, ordinary irritations, and the spiritual pressure of vows that did not become easy simply because they were solemn. The legend makes them exceptional. The fortress makes them particular. There is a difference. An exceptional figure floats above circumstance. A particular person lives inside it. He wakes because a bell rings. He eats what is given. He obeys or is expected to obey. He may pray with conviction or habit or effort or distraction. He may be brave. He may be vain. He may be pious in the morning and impatient by noon. He may believe deeply in the mission and still complain inwardly about the cold. That does not make him less historical. It makes him more so. One of the mistakes often made with the Templars is to treat contradiction as proof of hidden truth. They were monks and warriors, so surely there must be a secret behind that combination. They were disciplined and powerful, so surely their public identity concealed another one. They became rich while taking vows of poverty, so surely everything about them must have been hypocrisy. The reality is more difficult and more interesting. Medieval institutions could hold contradictions openly. A religious order could possess wealth collectively, while individual members lived under rules against personal ownership. Armed force could be justified through a sacred mission, even if that justification remains morally troubling to us now. Obedience could be treated as virtue, even when obedience served violent ends. None of this requires a hidden chamber beneath the chapel. The visible structure is strange enough. That is what daily life helps us understand. The Templar fortress was not a mask hiding the real order behind it. It was one of the places where the order became real. The chapel and the armoury were not opposites accidentally placed near one another. They were both part of the same system. The refectory and the stable, the gate and the sleeping quarters, The watchtower and the storehouse each held a piece of the answer to what the Templars were trying to be. Trying is the important word. A rule describes an ideal, a fortress reveals the effort, and effort is always uneven. Some men likely lived with deep sincerity. Some probably failed in ways that were ordinary before they became scandalous. Some may have found the discipline clarifying, even consoling. Others may have bent under it, resented it, or performed it outwardly while their inner life remained far less orderly. We should resist the urge to turn them all into either saints or frauds. Both versions are too neat. History is rarely kind enough to be neat. The shadow behind the legend is not simply guilt or innocence. It is the human weight beneath a famous institution. It is the fact that great reputations are built out of repeated days that no one records. The day we have walked through, from the first bell to the closing gate, contains no grand battle, no secret confession, no treasure discovered under a stone. Yet it may bring us closer to the truth than 100 dramatic claims. Because institutions are not made only in crises. They are made in routine. The way men eat, the way they are watched, the way they sleep, the way orders move through rank, the way labor is divided, the way prayer is placed before work and work returns to prayer, the way a gate turns strangers into decisions, the way a horse's care becomes part of military readiness, the way a weapon waits under rule rather than lying loose in private hands. These details do not solve the Templar mystery. They reduce the appetite for false mysteries, and that is valuable. The myths surrounding the Templars often survive because they offer a simpler pleasure than history does. They give us hidden masters, secret codes, forbidden knowledge, buried treasure, perfect villains, perfect victims. They let the past behave like a locked box, and they promise that the right key will open everything. But the past is rarely a locked box. More often, it is a room full of worn objects, partial records, broken assumptions, and people who did not know they were supposed to explain themselves to us. The fortress is such a room. Its walls do not say, "Here is the final answer." They say, "Look more carefully. Look at the water stores. Look at the tired horses. Look at the plain meal. Look at the chapel flame. Look at the gate hinge. Look at the servant carrying something too heavy while the famous brother passes through the same courtyard. Look at the watchman, whose whole duty, for an hour, may be to notice that nothing has changed." This is not anti-legend. It is better than legend. Legend preserves intensity. Daily life preserves scale. Without daily life, the Templars become too large to understand. They turn into symbols moving through fog. With daily life restored, they become smaller, but not lesser. The smaller view allows us to see the cost of the life they claim to live. It shows us that the fusion of prayer and war was not merely a doctrine. It was breakfast, watch duty, storage, sleep, discipline, and the repeated suppression of personal ease. And it shows something else, too. The Templar fortress did not only defend against enemies outside the walls, it defended an idea about order. The idea that violence could be restrained by rule, that appetite could be disciplined by silence, that fear could be managed by watchfulness. That individual will could be folded into a sacred mission. That stone, schedule, vow, hierarchy, and habit could shape men into something more reliable than private desire. Whether that idea was noble, dangerous, necessary, arrogant, or all of these at once depends on where we stand and what evidence we are willing to hold in view. The fortress does not let us choose too easily. That is its final seriousness. It refuses the easy romance of the holy warrior because it shows the dirt, labor, fatigue, and dependency beneath the mantle. It refuses the easy dismissal of the Templars as only hypocrites because it shows the severity of the discipline they attempted to live under. It refuses the conspiratorial fantasy because its real mysteries are not coded into symbols, but built into the ordinary contradiction of men praying before they prepare for violence. And perhaps that is why the empty ruins of such places still affect us. Not because they confirm every story told about the Templars, because they outlast those stories. A stone wall does not care whether a later century has made it fashionable, sinister, sacred, or ridiculous. It remains there, marked by weather and use, holding traces of lives that were more practical and more uncertain than legend prefers. The wall remembers no perfect myth. It remembers pressure, hands, feet, smoke, bells, animals, hunger, fear, prayer, the closing of a gate at dusk. The shadow behind the legend, then, is not one hidden truth. It is the ordinary life that legend keeps casting into darkness because it is not dramatic enough. But ordinary life is where the order was tested. Not once at the famous ending, every day. The last bell is softer than the first. Or perhaps it only feels that way because the fortress has grown tired around it. At dawn, the bell struck the darkness like a command. It pulled men from sleep, gathered them toward prayer, and pressed the day into motion before the sun had fully found the walls. Now, at the far edge of the day, the same kind of sound moves differently. It does not summon the fortress into labor. It gathers what remains of it inward. The courtyard is nearly empty. Where morning had footsteps, buckets, horses, tools, voices, and the low machinery of survival, night leaves only traces. A darker patch where water spilled, straw caught near a threshold, a rope coiled beside a wall, the faint smell of smoke and animals, a gate closed so firmly it seems less like an object than a decision the whole fortress has agreed to obey. Above, a guard remains on the wall. There is always someone awake. That detail matters more than any legend. The day can end for many, but not for all. Safety, if it exists at all, is unevenly distributed. Some men sleep because another man does not. Some dream because another watches the road. Some rest because someone else listens to the dark and refuses to trust it completely. Inside the sleeping space, bodies settle into the limited mercy of rest. The day has stripped away the grander images. No one looks like a symbol when asleep. A man under a rough covering is simply a man. Breath, fatigue, discomfort, perhaps a prayer unfinished in the mind. The white mantle, if folded or set aside, cannot carry the weight of myth for him now. The fortress lowers its voice. The chapel is dim. The candles have burned down or been extinguished, depending on the hour and need. The stone keeps a little of the day's warmth, then gives it up slowly. The stables quiet in stages, never completely. A horse shifts. Another exhales. Leather hangs in darkness. Iron rests. The armoury waits with its patient, restrained violence, unused for another day, which is its own kind of blessing. Nothing dramatic has happened, and that is why the day is worth remembering. A single lost day inside a Templar fortress would not have entered a chronicle. No king arrived. No siege began. No accusation was read aloud. No treasure changed hands. No secret ritual opened beneath the chapel floor. It was only a day of waking, praying, eating, watching, grooming, repairing, carrying, deciding, closing, and lying down again under the discipline of stone and rule. Yet this is where history becomes intimate, not in the famous collapse of the order, not in the rumors that later centuries could not stop polishing, but in the repeated life that made the order real before it became legendary. The bell did not ring for myths. It rang for tired men. The gate did not close on symbols. It closed on bodies, animals, tools, supplies, fears, habits, and hopes that rarely found their way into writing. That is the quiet correction the fortress offers. The Templars were not only the story told about them afterward, they were also the sound of a bowl on a table, the ache in a guard's legs, the smell of horse breath before sunrise, the caution at a gate near dusk, the rule that made appetite bow its head, the prayer spoken by men who may not all have felt equally holy, but who were required to kneel all the same. The last bell fades through the walls. For a moment, the fortress seems to hold the sound after the sound itself is gone. It lingers in the courtyard, in the chapel arch, in the passage under the gate, along the battlements where the wind has begun its night work again. Then even that trace thins into silence. Centuries from now, the voices will be gone. The horses will be gone. The stored grain, the leather straps, the guarded meals, the private irritations, the low prayers, the careful hands, the watchful eyes, all gone. Perhaps the walls will remain in some altered form, broken by weather, visited by strangers, photographed in daylight, explained on plaques, folded into arguments about crusade, faith, violence, power, and myth. But the stones will not explain everything. They never do. They will only suggest that people once lived here under a pressure we can approach, but never fully enter. A pressure made of belief and fear, discipline and hunger, obedience and uncertainty. A life severe enough to become strange, ordinary enough to be forgotten, and contradictory enough to keep echoing long after the order itself disappeared. The road outside lies dark. The gate is closed. Somewhere on the wall, a guard turns his face toward the unseen distance, and inside the fortress, beneath the last fading memory of the bell, the day finally lets go.